Let's get started. So guys, yesterday we primarily focused on Azure Virtual Machine Service under Azure Compute, and we looked at Azure Virtual Machine Service overview, the use case of Azure Virtual Machine, wherein I told you that 70 to 80% of the cost that an organization pay for their cloud consumption, 70 to 80% of that constitutes the cost for virtual machine and storage. And storage is directly linked to virtual machine because when you build virtual machine, you attach disk to it, and you can also have Azure storage account or Azure file share integrated with virtual machine so that applications that you deploy inside virtual machine, they can access the data or files from Azure storage account file share. So storage and compute or Azure Virtual Machine are very critical and popular services that organizations use. Other than this, we use Kubernetes service. Kubernetes, or let's say container service. Container is another type of compute service that organizations use, but they only use containers for hosting applications which have smaller modules or applications which are based on microservices architecture. For any monolithic application, for any uh, complex application, or for any large application that requires multiple servers, multiple virtual machines, like let's say SAP HANA or Oracle Hyperion, Informatica. For these applications, you will use virtual machines because you cannot configure these applications into Kubernetes clusters. So you cannot break these applications into multiple modules and run them based on microservices architecture, which is primarily meant for containers. So containers is another way of hosting applications in Azure. Then there is another way, which is functions, which is more of a serverless computing. So in serverless computing, your application or your data stores in a storage repository. Whenever there is an event that occurs on your application, for example, let's say your application is more into e-commerce. When a user browses your application, the moment user types abc.com or let's say flipkart.com, it triggers an event. Based on that event, compute resources are assigned to your application so that the processing can happen based on what user is requesting, whether user is searching for some product, whether user is looking into history to see any order history of his or her, or whether user is making a new product purchase. Based on what you are doing, the compute resources will be assigned to your application in runtime. And once that event or activity or function completes, then they will be deallocated. So that's serverless computing. So we basically have uh, computing options. If I just want to summarize in compute, and this is not for Microsoft Azure, this is common for all the clouds. You will need to find out which service is available in cloud. So we have virtual machines, which is your IaaS service. Then we have app services, which is your PaaS service. App services is similar to website hosting, like GoDaddy, HostGator, Bluehost, wherein you purchase a domain, then you purchase a hosting plan based on whether you need a dedicated server, whether you need shared hosting plan, and they will assign you some, you know, they will assign you some space in their hosting infrastructure. Then you will upload your website code and data through SFTP solution. You can use FileZilla, you can use WinSCP, or you can use any secure file transfer protocol solution to upload your data. That's what app services is. App services works in the same manner, wherein you will decide what application platform you need, whether you need it based on Java, .NET, ASP, uh, or any Visual Studio. Then you will decide whether you need it with Windows or Linux, LAMP or WEMP structure. So it basically gives you an option to pick and choose the configuration. And once you are done, then it gives you an option to basically upload your data securely to app services so that Microsoft can manage the underlying infrastructure and you only focus on your application and data. So you have app services. Then you have containers. Containers and Kubernetes. Kubernetes we basically use when we have multiple thousands of containers and management becomes tedious. Then we use Kubernetes to orchestrate or automate container provisioning, container lifecycle management. For identity lifecycle management, we use Microsoft Entra in Azure. And for container lifecycle management, we use Kubernetes. Kubernetes as a technology, and the service name is Azure Kubernetes Service. So that's what we use for applications which are smaller in nature, which can be broken into microservices. That's what we use. Then comes Azure Functions. They are serverless. Serverless or event-driven computing. So that's another option. As I explained, that your application is stored into a storage repository. In case of Azure, it will be stored into block storage. As in when event occurs on your application, compute resources, which is CPU memory, will be allocated in runtime. Once that event is completed, those resources are deallocated and your application code continues to remain in the block storage. Now that way you can minimize the cost of infrastructure. However, not all options are available for all applications. So if I have 4 options, I need to understand the use cases, that which option is better, which option out of these 4 is better for my applications. So in general, virtual machines are good to go for any application that you would like to install and run and host and put to production. App services are primarily meant for applications where you don't need heavy lifting, where you can uh, leave management overhead to Microsoft. Containers and Kubernetes are meant for smaller applications, microservices based applications, and functions are meant for serverless applications or applications which are event driven, which works basis on the event. So that's what my compute services are in Microsoft Azure as well as public cloud. Now, you navigate to any public cloud, whether it's Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud. At the end of the day, you will find these services. For example, if you navigate to Google Cloud, virtual machine is replaced with compute engine service. I'm saying it's another name of virtual machine service. App services is replaced with Elastic Beanstalk, which is an AWS. Similarly, Google also provides the similar service. Containers in Kubernetes is EKS or GKE, which is Elastic Kubernetes Service or Google Kubernetes Engine. And Azure Functions is replaced with Cloud Run. So Cloud Run is the service in Google Cloud that is similar to Azure Functions. So these are the services that you will find when it comes to compute services in any public cloud. Is everyone with me on this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's move on. So this is what we did. We basically focused on virtual machines in Microsoft Azure, and we did a lab around virtual machine. We also looked at some configurable options around virtual machines. Uh, so this is what I did in the second wedge. So we basically did all of these activities, operational activities, which is resizing a virtual machine. I believe we did that, in your batch also, when we upsized or downsized a virtual machine. Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, Raghu.
Okay. Then resizing a disk. And for resizing a disk, which is similar to resizing a virtual machine must be in stop deallocated state. You can upsize the disk and performance both, which means you can increase the size of the disk and you can change the performance, which is if your virtual machine is standard HDD, you can make it standard SSD and premium SSD. Downsize the disk. Disk downsizing is not allowed in Azure. you cannot shrink the disk or lower the size of the disk because it has a potential of data loss, and no public cloud allows it. It is not in Azure. It is also not allowed in AWS, GCP, Alibaba, Oracle, IBM, Accenture, and any public cloud that you can name. However, you can always downsize the performance. You can change the performance from premium to standard or from SSD to magnetic and vice versa. Then how do you associate or dissociate public IP to a virtual machine? Did we do this yesterday? Did we look at this option yesterday, guys? Or the session got over by the time we were here? I just don't remember. That's the reason I'm asking you.
No, we assigned public IP, Raghu, because you
Great.
said like it might be useful for next labs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So we basically so this is the third option. I'm saying there could be multiple use cases or multiple call drivers. However, since you're not part of operations team and your focus is not more on gaining in-depth insight with operational activities in Azure, you are more focused into identity and access management domain, but core services knowledge is very much needed there also. So I have only identified basic operations that you typically do. I have not talked about any troubleshooting, which operations team is also involved into with respect to uh, when when you're not able to connect to a virtual machine, when there are network related issues, when virtual machines are when there are performance related issues or connectivity related issues. So we are not focusing on troubleshooting, we're just focusing on basic operational activities. So this is one operational activity that operations team are involved into, which is associating or dissociating a public IP to a virtual machine. So how do we do this? We basically, so I log into my Azure portal. I'll navigate to the virtual machine. Let's say this is the virtual machine. And whether I want to allocate a public IP to this virtual machine. Now in Azure, we call it associate. So allocate, attach, associate. These are the same things. You can change them interchangeably and use them interchangeably in Azure, because in AWS they call it allocate, in GCP they call it attach. So these are the terminologies. So how do we do this? Anything related to IP address is a networking service. IP address is part of networking. So when it comes to IP addresses on virtual machine, you need to navigate to virtual machine network interface card. That service is holding the IP address. So where exactly network interface card is? On the overview tab, under networking, the first option is networking service, networking settings. When you click here, it takes you to network interface card of virtual machine or networking settings of virtual machine, wherein you will find NSGs, you will find network interface card. So this is the network interface card, which is connected to the virtual machine right now. You can also see the network interface card logo and network interface card here. So this network interface card is connected to the virtual machine. And this network interface card is actually holding both public and private IP address of the virtual machine. And you can see here, it has private IP address, which is 192.168.1.4. And it also has public IP address. So both IP addresses are attached or hosted on this network interface card. If we want to make any changes to these IP addresses, we will need to navigate to network interface card blade. So we'll click on it. So whenever you need to make any changes to the IP address configuration of a virtual machine, you will always navigate to its network interface card blade. All right. So we are in the network interface card. Now over here, you have an option under settings that says IP configurations. You can click on IP configuration, and now you will see IP config, which is similar to what you do inside the OS IP config command. So inside the OS, this is my command prompt. If I type IP config command, I get the IP addresses of my system, of my laptop. Similarly, this IP config contains the IP addresses. So you will click on IP config here, and you will see this pop-up window at the right, wherein you will see both private IP address settings and public IP address settings. If you want to dissociate public IP from this virtual machine, just uncheck this box and public IP will be dissociated. If you want to associate the public IP, then you can check this box, and Azure will either let you pick and choose an existing public IP which is idle, which is not associated to any service, or Azure will also give you an option to create a new one for you. So either you select an existing one which is available from the drop down, or a new one that Azure is creating for you. So that way you can associate public IP and dissociate. Similarly, when it comes to private IP, if you ever want to change the allocation of IP address from dynamic to static, you can just switch the radio button. Now it will be static IP address for Azure virtual machines. So there are times when you need static IP address on virtual machines. For example, if your virtual machine is hosting Active Directory services, if your virtual machine happens to be a DNS server, DHCP server, if it happens to be a certificate server, ADFS server, web proxy services, any service that your virtual machine is hosting and other machines in the environment depend on your virtual machine, then it is mandatory for your virtual machine to have a static IP, because they would be connecting to your virtual machine with its IP address. And if your virtual machine IP address changes every day, every time you reboot the virtual machine, then the entire service will get disrupted. Imagine that your virtual machine is hosting directory services role, Active Directory domain service, and its IP address changes. Your entire environment will go down. Nobody will be able to authenticate. No authentication will work. No DNS resolution will work. Internet will be down in your environment. Why? Because DNS server is not available, and DNS is part of Active Directory. So in those scenarios, we ensure that we have a static IP address on virtual machine. So this is how you get static IP. All you need to do, just save these settings and it will change based on your configuration. So that is where IP address related settings are configured. Then you have DNS server. If you want your virtual machine uh, to connect to a specific DNS server or to resolve with a specific DNS server, you can also put that information. So right now it is configured to receive DNS information from virtual network, whatever a DNS server is configured at the virtual network level to which this virtual machine is part of. If you want a if you want a specific DNS server, let's say you have multiple DNS server in your environment, and you want this virtual machine to resolve to do name resolution from a specific DNS server. You can click on custom and you can type the DNS server IP address and it will be done. So that's on the DNS server. If you want to restrict any traffic on this virtual machine from internet or internal traffic, then this is the network security group which is attached to the virtual machine. You can navigate to this network security group and create inbound outbound rules. It shows the properties, which is nothing. The important thing in the properties is resource ID. Whenever you raise any service request with Microsoft related to this virtual machine or this network interface, you need to copy this resource ID, which contains the FQDN, which basically tells you that yes, this resource is part of a subscription, whose subscription ID is this. This resource is contained in this resource group, which is SC300 practice. Then this resource is a network interface type resource. Here's the resource name. So that way Microsoft quickly knows that, okay, we are talking about that specific resource. That's it. This is the MAC address of your network interface card. You already know what MAC address is. We use MAC address also for some network related security configurations or whitelisting or blacklisting. So that is all. So this is about the network related configurations of a virtual machine. Then comes changing the private IP allocation method. I have just shown it to you, the IP allocation method, which is static to dynamic and vice versa. Then connecting to an Azure virtual machine. There are three options to connect to an Azure virtual machine. The first option is you can connect via Bastion. Bastion is a service. If you remember when we did virtual networking, there was an option to create Bastion service. And I asked you to not create it, not check that box, because it's a paid service. And we actually did not need at that point in time. We also don't need it today, but we need to understand the concept. So Bastion is a secure RDP or SSH connectivity service in Microsoft Azure that allows secure connection to your virtual machine. Bastion is similar to a jump host or a remote desktop solution, which, or you can say, if you work with CyberArk, CyberArk also has this capability. CyberArk has privileged access management, wherein you can onboard services into CyberArk, and then you can have your employee's account configured in CyberArk and provide your employees appropriate level of access towards those services. Your employees will log into CyberArk, will navigate to a specific service, which is a virtual machine, double click on it, and they are connected. So CyberArk will not expose user ID and password of that service because it's a privileged service. Second, while the employee is remain connected to the service, CyberArk can take screenshots. It can also record the session, that what exactly employee is doing inside the service. Similar to that, I will not say that Bastionos is at par with CyberArk, but at least it works on the same lines. So it also provides you those capabilities wherein you can manage multiple concurrent RDP and SSH sessions from Bastion host, and you can allow multiple sessions from here. So that's Bastion service. So this is how you see the service when it is about a virtual machine. So that's my virtual machine. If I hit on the overview tab, if I hit connect, I see two options, connect and connect via Bastion. If I hit connect via Bastion, and if there is any Bastion host which is configured in this network, it will show me. If it is not configured, then it will say deploy. So it has already picked up basic configuration and it is just asking you to hit this button. It will deploy Bastion service, and then you will be connecting to your machine using Bastion. Remember, it's a paid service. Second, it's a browser-based SSH and RDP connection, which basically means when you connect to a resource using Bastion, it opens another tab in the browser and you get browser-based access. So since it's browser-based access, it is also secure because it uses secure SSH and RDP connectivity on port 443. So it's a good service. However, most of the large corporates, they already have privileged access management solutions in place, so they don't go with Bastion. If you need detailed information around this service, then I have a recorded session on my channel. Please go through that video, which gives you detailed information about this service with respect to use cases, how do we provision it, what are the best practices, what you need to be careful of, how do you reduce the cost, how do you uh, leverage a single Bastion host with multiple virtual networks in Azure to optimize the cost by leveraging peering connections and whatnot. Everything is there in that video. If you have interest, go through that video. You will know everything about Bastion host service. Right now, this is all I want to talk about in this session. Okay, so first is Bastion, second is Connect. When I say Connect, the other option, in this option, Microsoft will allow you to download the RDP file of this virtual machine. And so example, you will download the RDP file on your system, and then you can use that RDP file So this RDP file is downloaded. I'll just click on this RDP file and it will initiate the connection to my virtual machine. Now, the connection will not work as we speak today. Why? Because my virtual machine is currently not running. It is in stop deallocated state. So you cannot RDP into a server or a machine which is currently not running. So as expected, I'm getting this error. Now, why my machine is not running? Because I'm saving cost here. After I was done with the session yesterday, the afternoon session, I stopped this machine. Now that we are back in the session, I will start the machine. So that way I have saved the cost overnight. If I left this virtual machine up and running, by now, I'm say from 6 o'clock in the evening yesterday and 9 o'clock in the subsequent morning, it's like 15 hours. So 15 hours is almost equivalent to 100 rupees. I would have wasted 100 rupees by now. So I saved those 100 rupees. Obviously, in a production environment, you cannot follow this approach because their servers run 24 into 7. You don't shut down because they have applications which require to be up and running all the time. But anywhere, any environment, any application that is used during business hours, you can always have automation configured around that application, around that server, so that the server runs only during business hours. Yesterday, Naeem has this question. Here's the answer. So on the virtual machine blade, if you navigate to automation, now what Microsoft has done, earlier Microsoft would support automation using ARM templates, using its automation account. And then Microsoft probably thought, let's promote our Logic App service. Let's do automation using Logic App. And that is where Microsoft has added one option in most of the services, at least in the core services, wherein you have certain tasks. It is in preview, but it works perfectly fine. I have it configured at most of the customers. You can add automation tasks for this virtual machine. So these are the automation tasks that you can do. For example, stop power of virtual machine. I can configure this automation task, which will power off my virtual machine at specific point in time. For example, let's say 9 o'clock in the evening when everyone is out of office, whenever I feel. And so how do you configure it? You just need to authenticate Logic App service with your virtual machine, so that Logic App has the capability to power of your virtual machine, which basically means Logic App would need some role, some RBAC, which is related to virtual machine contributor or whatever RBAC that it needs. So here you just need to connect this automation service, which is Logic App in the backend with your Azure virtual machine so that it can power off the virtual machine, and also with your Outlook Office 365 so that it can send you the email before powering off the virtual machine, right? And that's exactly what we saw yesterday when we were provisioning the virtual machine. Under advanced, there was an option to power off the virtual machine, but there was no option to start the virtual machine. So it was like half-baked automation, but this is full automation. So here you configure the power off option. And then if I come back to the virtual machine and go back to the automation once again, then there is another option, another automation task, which is start the virtual machine. So you need to configure both power off in the evening, start at some time the subsequent morning. And start the virtual machine is the same thing. You just need to connect Logic App with this virtual machine and connect your M365 account so that it can send you an email. It can send an email to an individual email address, email box, or it can send an email to a DL also, probably the DL that belongs to your network operations team or monitoring team. So they are made aware of these incidents that a Logic App is triggering a workflow which will shut down and start a virtual machine at a specific point in time. So these are my options. You have some additional options, which is deallocate virtual machine. Deallocate virtual machine, basically the same thing. Stop VMSQ time of the day. Deallocate basically means it will stop from Azure portal, and power of virtual machine basically means it will stop the virtual machine from inside the OS. So if you power of the virtual machine, you will continue to pay for compute resources. If you deallocate the virtual machine, you will not pay for CPU and memory at least. So choice is yours whether you want to power off or deallocate. I'm saying in the production environment, if there is any virtual machine that supports or that needs to be run for a limited hours, we go with these options, second and fourth, start and deallocate. And when it comes to deallocate, what we do inside the virtual machine to be on safer side, because when you deallocate a virtual machine, when it starts next time, there could be a couple of services whose startup type is manual. So if the startup type is manual, those services will not auto start, right? And that may affect your application. So what we do, we also use an option inside the operating system, which is known as task scheduler. So we configure a task scheduler. In task scheduler, we put all the services that needs to be started. So task scheduler runs at a specific time frame and it will start all the services that needs to be there so that you can reduce manual intervention up to certain extent. So these are all production use cases. In trainings, we don't typically discuss production use cases. We don't get into the troubleshooting also to save time. I'm just sharing all of this so that you can relate that if I'm learning a service, if there is an option, then what is the implementation of it? That is why I'm explaining all of this. Okay. You can also send monthly cost for resources, which basically means if you want somebody to notify that this is what the monthly cost of your virtual machine, you can also configure it from this automation. So when Microsoft started the Logic App integration with Azure services, there were only two options, start and deallocate. Now I see additional two options. So slowly and gradually, Microsoft will add more workflows here. So what Microsoft is trying to do, they're trying to make your life easier by giving you automation capabilities. And in the back end, they are managing all the heavy lifting. You can do the same thing by navigating to Logic App Service. In fact, when you configure any automation, it starts to reflect here. So you can also create a Logic App. You can use, a Logic App designer to create a workflow. However, that is where you will need sound knowledge of Logic App Service. But with that approach that Microsoft has provided you, you actually don't need any knowledge of Logic App. All you do is from UI in Azure Virtual Machine Blade with respect to the automation, and the heavy lifting happens in the backend. So that's the concept of automation in virtual machine, which is equally important that you need to be aware of. Okay. So we can connect via RDP. Now that my virtual machine is up and running by now, it stays running. So I'll show you how do we connect via RDP. I already have RDP file with me. I'll just double click on that file and you can see it directly gave me the option to provide the credentials of the virtual machine because RDP file has username embedded into it. RDP file has certificate information embedded into it. So it will directly ask you to provide the password and you will be logged in. So if I just type the password, I will be logged into the machine. Username yesterday I changed actually. So it's Azure admin now. So it is connecting to my virtual machine. You can see. Great. So I'm connected to my virtual machine. It's coming on a second screen. I'm connected. This happens to be a Server 2019 operating system. Hence, I'm getting this UI. Now, what happens after this moment is the job of Windows and Linux admin. Your job is not to manage the server or manage the configuration of the server. It is primarily goes with Windows and Linux admin. However, you should have basic understanding or basic knowledge of configuration. Now, cloud makes you multi-talented person, as I told you on day one also. When I was not in cloud, when prior to 2010, cloud happened to me in 2010. Prior to 2010, I had very limited knowledge of all of these things. I did not know much of Linux administration. I did not know much of databases. I did not know much of analytics ETL. I did not know much of, uh, you know, much of virtualization, or I would say networking and storage configuration, storage virtualization. I did not have that knowledge. My core domain was into server administration, which is from Windows perspective, and cybersecurity. That's what I used to know. After 2010, when cloud happened to me, today I know something of everything because cloud makes you multi-talented. Cloud teaches you networking, cloud teaches you storage, cloud teaches you virtualization, cloud teaches you some bit of Windows and Linux administration also. Cloud teaches you identity and access management, which is Azure AD, Active Directory Domain Service, or Microsoft Entra AD. So cloud teaches you a lot because cloud is a platform. It's not one service that you work with. So once you are in cloud domain, make sure that you learn something of everything that will make you a good cloud practitioner and that will reduce the dependencies on other people when you are working in cloud domain. So when you're working as an Entra admin, if there is something that needs to be done on virtual machine service, it's a very small task. You don't need to wait for a couple of hours or 2 days for Wintel team to achieve it for you. You can probably get into that machine and do it because you are Entra admin. You are Entra admin, which means you are admin of the entire Azure cloud subscription. All the services are under your control. You can grant yourself temporary access to that service, navigate to that service, fix the issue, and come back and start your work. Nobody is stopping you. You are the identity administrator. Now, when it comes to your customer environment, you should probably hang on. You should not do that. There, you need to follow the principles, follow the ITSM approach, whichever customer has laid down, the processes that they have created for certain tasks to be completed. But as far as it is your own environment, you're part of a captive unit, you don't need to wait. So I had one of my colleague who joined a captive unit from managed service provider. Now, what he would do, he started doing everything all by himself. He would never wait for ITSM team or a specific storage team, virtualization team, automation team, Windows team, Linux team, database team, and whatnot to do anything. Whenever there was a small thing that is blocking his work and that has a dependency on other team, he would grant himself the appropriate access through PIM for limited period of time so that it is recorded also. He navigate to that service, do that configuration, come back and do his job. So that's what cloud makes you. Cloud makes you multi-talented. All right. As far as AD is concerned, you will also do some exercises within Active Directory starting from next week. So that's how we connect to a virtual machine. If you want to disconnect, you can click here at the bottom, Windows logo key, then click on this power sign and hit disconnect. Then comes the third option. The third option is start run MSTSC, type public IP address of the VM and hit connect. Now this is the fastest way of connecting to a virtual machine. All you need to do, you don't need to capture the RDP files. Just copy the public IP. Click on at the bottom, you see this Windows logo key. Click here, type run, open this run box, type MSTSC, which is remote desktop connection, and then paste the public IP of the VM and hit connect. That's it. And provide the credentials of the VM. This is also one of the way to connect to a VM. When it comes to SSH, which is if it's a Linux VM, you can use solutions like WinSCP, PuTTY, using which you can connect to a Linux VM also. If it's a Linux VM, you can directly connect it from the portal also. Azure provides you shell access. So from there, you can also connect to a Linux VM. So these are my options to connect to a Linux VM. I'm saying you have CLI and PowerShell also available here that you can make use of. Other than this, there could be uh, multiple operational activities that infrastructure team or operations team is heavily into. We don't need to get into those because those are specific to that team. Unless you aspire to become part of that team in the long run, you should not get into that part. So that's what about virtual machine that we did yesterday. And then in the end, most important thing, if you ever forget the password or username of a virtual machine in Azure, and if you happen to be the admin, if you happen to have virtual machine contributor RBAC assigned to your identity, then you can reset the admin username and password of an Azure virtual machine. How? On the virtual machine blade at the bottom under help, there is an option, reset password. Click on this option and here you get reset password option. So you can, it shows you the username of the virtual machine. You just need to type the password. If you also want to change the username, just remove the username, type a new username, type new password, and update. So that way you can update the username and password of the virtual machine. This is another option which is reset configuration. If you select reset configuration, then your virtual machine will come back to factory settings. And I'm sure you understand what factory settings are. Factory settings basically means the virtual machine will be rebuilt from the OS image and it will lose all the data. So never ever reset the configuration, always reset the password. You should reset the configuration when you want to remove all applications from the virtual machine and you want to reuse that virtual machine for some other initiatives. So that's where we use reset configuration. So this is all about virtual machine services that I wanted to cover in this training. I'm open to questions if you have any with respect to the topics that we have covered so far. Anything that I have not covered, but you wanted me to cover in virtual machine service, this is the time when you can speak, and I'll see whether it is, it is feasible to cover it right now. So please let me know if there is anything that any question that you may have or anything else that you always wanted to learn and you want me to talk about, I can do that. Otherwise, we will move on to the topic, which is the new service, logging, monitoring, and auditing. The last services under core services that we need to cover today before we start with Microsoft Entra ID from Monday onwards. Yes, Rachna.
Regarding this on-prem, in the hybrid mode. So when from on-prem to you start reflecting everything in cloud. So
Yeah.
to access the domain controllers, I have seen that in my project they are using this Bastion. So how is that achieved? Like, how are we creating virtual machines for access to these domain controllers? I mean, how is that achieved? I would really like to know what are the inner workings.
So you're saying that your project is using hybrid, wherein you have virtual machines in Azure. I
Yes,
actually
and
didn't.
that
Huh.
yes, so that virtual machine when we connect, we have connection to the domain controller in on-prem,
Okay.
and with that connection we are doing it through the Bastion.
Okay. So Bastion is one service. I'll say let's understand it this way. Okay, so let's understand the scenario. This is cloud, right? In cloud, we have Microsoft Azure. When I say Microsoft Azure, we basically have Microsoft Azure subscription. Inside subscription, we have a network. Inside network, we have our virtual machines. Okay. And then you have this on-premises environment, your on-premises office. There you also have some servers and applications hosted, right? Now tell me what exactly are you saying? So you're saying that AD is configured on-premises. You need to help me design the problem statement, then I can talk about the solution. So are you saying that Active Directory is configured on premises?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
we have an AD that is there on.
AD is on premises. And then you are using Bastion host service to connect to what? Virtual machines in Azure or AD?
Connecting to AD, so the two domain controllers that we usually have in on-prem AD, one for
Uh,
users and the one for policies.
uh,
So there are two virtual machines on Azure that I see. Not Although there are two, we cannot directly connect to the group policies domain controller. We can connect to the users and groups
computers.
domain controller. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That machine we can connect through this bastion, and then we can then remote desktop to the group policy.
Group Policy
That
Management
system.
Console, GPMC.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so understand what is happening. So you have two machines. Let's say there are two domain controllers in on-premises. Let's consider them PDC and ADC. Primary domain controller, secondary or additional domain controller. Now to avoid any connectivity issue, because I'm sure from on-premises to Azure, there is also a VPN tunnel. I'm just assuming that they also have a VPN tunnel. But what happens, sometimes this VPN goes down, and to avoid any connectivity issue, because identity infrastructure, if it goes down, then your entire environment will be down, because if there is no authentication, applications will stop working. So what we do to be on safer side, when companies migrate from on premises to Azure, or when they start with cloud presence, they create a replica of domain controllers in Azure also. So what your client has done, they've created the similar two servers. I would say two servers on premises, two servers in Azure, and they've also added them to the same Active Directory domain and forest, which means you have a total of four domain controllers now. Now there is a now then there is a FSMO role concept, which basically means out of these four, which one is more powerful, which one is hosting more capability. That's a different thing, which is more on the design, that what your AD admin has done, whether your AD admin has transferred all the FSMO roles to these servers in cloud, whether your AD admin has restricted the FSMO here, and you and AD admin is using these two servers, two virtual machines in cloud only for the authentication. So inside cloud, if there is any server, any application that needs authentication, that authentication is done from these AD machines in cloud. Imagine if these AD machines are not there in cloud, then for the authentication, the request will go to on premises. And what if there is no connectivity between cloud and on premises? Then the authentication will not work. So it's a normal design, it's a common design wherein organizations put their directory services instance in cloud, so that cloud hosted applications can authenticate to that instance, and all on-premises application continues to authenticate with on-premises instance. Now, Bestin comes into the picture when you connect to these virtual machines. So since these virtual machines doesn't have a private IP, sorry, doesn't have a public IP, and from TCS, you don't have access to this network. Your TCS network is not connected to this cloud network of customer. So that is why you're using Bastion host service to securely connect to these two virtual machines, any of these two virtual machines. Now, after you connect to the virtual machines, what module you get to see depends on how your identity has been configured. Your on your ID, what admin has granted access to. If admin has granted you enterprise admin access, I'm saying inside AD, you have certain access like enterprise admin, domain admin, group policy admin. users in computer admin. So depending on the access level that has been granted to you, when you connect to these virtual machines via Bastion, you basically get to see that capability in your view. That's how it is happening. Make sense?
Yes, somewhat. Yeah.
So that's how it works basically. So you have domain controllers in on-premises, you have domain controllers in cloud. You connect to cloud domain controllers using Bastion. You get the UI of these domain controllers, and what you see inside UI depends on what role has been granted to your identity. So if you are only able to see group policy users in computer, which means you have limited role. You have user and access admin role, plus you have group policy admin role. You don't have domain admin or enterprise admin capabilities assigned to your identity. That's the reason you are looking at very limited options, and probably that's what your responsibilities and accountabilities are as a TCS employee to manage for the customer. So in a production environment, trust me, you will never get admin access or full access. And in a training environment, you have full access. So training is your opportunity wherein you can, build, and you can do break and fix, you can build services, you can explore all the capabilities. Plus, in most of the operation scenarios, you have a sandbox environment, access to a sandbox environment wherein you can reproduce the entire problem statement, and then you can look for solutions. Now, this is not a problem statement. This is more of the configuration that you wanted to understand, that if I see this, then what is powering in the backend. So that you can do here. I'm saying you can create a similar infrastructure in your Azure subscription, wherein you will have, so assume that on create one network in Azure, a virtual network, and put two domain controllers there. And assume that that virtual network is an on-premises network. Then create another network in Azure and put another two domain controllers there. Now, Active Directory is an intelligent application. It doesn't need, it can replicate over the internet. So the moment you add another domain controller in other network, it will quickly be able to identify the moment you type an existing forest and domain information, and you will say that I want to add an additional domain, I want to add an additional domain controller to an existing domain, it will automatically replicate the sys1 folder, which will contain all user identities and group policies information. And then you can provision Bastion service and connect to these virtual machines using Bastion. And so you can reproduce the entire scenario in Azure and then have a clarity in terms of what your admin may have done. That's how we do. Any other
Well,
any other participant? Yes.
no, I had another, maybe not related to this, but
Uh,
um, would we be covering, like, my migrating the on-prem to complete cloud of anything of that sort? Do we have that in purview for this session?
No, that's not part of this session. But if you are interested in cloud migration, I delivered a webinar recently. I have the session recording of that webinar wherein I talked about how do we migrate servers and applications from on-premises data center to Microsoft Azure cloud. What are the considerations that you need to make with respect to planning, with respect to assessment, with respect to identifying what is possible to migrate, what is not compatible in cloud, how do you perform assessment, what are the phases, which team is getting involved, what are the different stages. Then once you're done with the assessment, how do you migrate, what are the migration scenarios, rehost, lift and shift, re-architect, re-platform. And after it is completely migrated, then what happens in the cloud, how do you perform post migration activities, and once it goes into production in cloud, then what are your optimization capabilities. So it's a 2 hours webinar that I recently delivered for a large corporate wherein they wanted to understand the entire ecosystem of cloud assessment and migration. I can share that webinar recording with you. You go through that recording, and if you, after going through that recording, if you feel that you still have some additional questions, you can discuss it offline with me. Okay?
Oh, yeah. Please do share me that, Raghu.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other question, guys? Okay, if there are no more questions, let's move on to the next topic. Our next topic for today is monitoring, logging, and auditing. Monitoring, logging, and auditing in Microsoft Azure Cloud or in public cloud. So before we get started with this topic, I would like to share a resource with you, and I would like to give it a read. Okay, I'm putting that into the chat window. So this is the service in Microsoft Azure that we primarily use for monitoring. And now this service is also getting integrated the logging capability. There used to be a separate service for logging in the name Log Analytics Workspace. Microsoft is slowly and gradually deprecating that service and adding all logging capabilities to Azure Monitor. So logging and monitoring is going to be consolidated into one service in Azure, which is Azure Monitor. In fact, your Entra ID, it also has logging and monitoring capabilities. And those logging and monitoring capabilities are configured here itself in Azure Monitor, or it is powered by Azure Monitor. So, so when you navigate to Entra ID, I'm seeing Azure portal at the bottom, right at the bottom where it says monitoring. You see this sign-in logs and audit logs. Now, this capability is coming from here, from this service. This service is powering this capability. So when you navigate to any service, let's say you navigate to virtual machines. In virtual machine blade also, you will see monitoring. So monitoring will be a common view to most of the services. If I go to virtual network, you will see monitoring there also. Any virtual network you pick up, you will see monitoring here also. If you go to storage account, I'm just showing the services that we have covered so far in this session. You go to any Azure service, you will find one thing common, which is monitoring tab. And this monitoring tab, or the capabilities which you see in this monitoring tab across all Azure services, it is powered by this one tool, this one service, which is Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor is integrated with all services of Microsoft Azure that has the potential to get monitored. And with Azure Monitor capabilities in place, you are able to identify, discover, and manage the runtime activities. I'm saying in near real time, you will have good visibility into how that service is performing, whether that service is available, whether that service is experiencing an outage, whether that service is perfectly working fine, whether that service is running short of resources, it is going through resource crunch, all that is provided by Azure Monitor. So what I want you to do, I want you to read this article from top to bottom. Give yourself a quick read of this article from here to here. Don't get into the details of it, but read it at a very high level till here to understand what this service is, what are the building blocks of this service, how does this service works, and what are the typical use cases of this service along with the architecture of this service. So I give you 10 minutes to read this, and then I will start to cover. I will talk about some theoretical aspects of this service, and then we will get into the hands-on lab with respect to configuring this service for the resources that we have created so far. For example, for our virtual network, for our storage account, for our virtual machine that we provisioned yesterday. Now, if you happen to delete your virtual machine that you provisioned yesterday for the purpose of cost saving and you wanted to practice it again, go ahead and recreate a virtual machine because we are going to monitor we are going to configure the monitoring and logging of that virtual machine using Azure Monitor. So it is 10 minutes past 10 in the morning. I give you 10 minutes to go through this documentation, and we will resume the session at 20 minutes past 10 in the morning, exactly 10 minutes from now. Thank you. Meanwhile, I'll send attendance to your management. Do we have anything, anyone? Is everyone there? Am I audible?
Yes, Raghu.
Okay, great. Let's understand the theoretical aspects. As I said, history is very important for any technology. If you want to appreciate it, if you want to understand how it looks like in present. So when it comes to monitoring, I'm saying in general, we typically have three types of monitoring. Infrastructure monitoring. When I say infrastructure monitoring, it basically means you want to monitor your physical servers, virtual machines. And what exactly you want to monitor? You want to monitor the availability and performance. That's what infrastructure monitoring is all about, right? Then comes network monitoring. Now, when I say network monitoring, I am basically referring to monitor incoming, outgoing network traffic. That's what network monitoring is. And also the availability, that if you've created a couple of LAN, VLAN, VPN tunnels, MPLS circuits, they should be available. And in network monitoring, you basically focus on monitoring, you know, so you basically focus on monitoring networking devices, which are switches, routers, VPN gateways, etc. That's what network monitoring is. Then we have application monitoring. So when I say application monitoring, I am basically talking about, this is known as APM, application performance monitoring, right? Now in application performance monitoring, we typically monitor application availability, performance with respect to, let's say, page load time, time to live, TTL, module monitoring. You want to monitor any module within your application. So for example, uh, e-commerce application, Flipkart, you want to monitor how many concurrent user sessions are there, right? User sessions. You want to monitor if there are users on my portal, then what exactly are they doing? What product are they searching for? How long they stay on a specific product? Did they click on that product and add it to the cart, or they just scroll through the product and move on? If they have added any product to the cart, are they going through the purchase flow, or they just add it to the cart and move on to a different product? If they are going through purchase flow, are they getting any challenge for how long they stayed on that page? So just to understand the interest from users and send them appropriate marketing messages or email. So if you've noticed, when you are on e-commerce website, you search for a specific product, you typically get an email which says, were you looking for this product? Let's go ahead and make the purchase before it runs out of stock. Or it gives you, okay, we'll give you 10% additional discount, because they want to make sure that they convert it into sale. And sometimes you browse a product on certain websites and all of a sudden you see a product feed in your social networking. So on your Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and whatnot, you will start to see the ad of that product, and you wonder how come this product is coming here. I was just browsing this product on that respective website. You get an email. So this is all marketing strategies, SEO, SEM, consumer marketing, or behavior analytics and all that. This is what application monitoring is all about. So you basically do all of this using application monitoring, user session monitoring, module monitoring, time to live, page load time, application availability, uh, and then performance also. Performance in terms of how much time it is taking for a customer to check out. When the customer clicks on checkout, how quickly the payment gateway loads, when the customer fills the information, what is the integration time frame, if there is any latency, integration latency. That's what application monitoring is all about. And then comes the fourth, which is a bit unique, which is known as security monitoring. So when it comes to security monitoring, it is not different. Security monitoring is a combination of the first three. In security monitoring, your objective is to monitor for security. So you want to monitor if there is any uh, you know unauthorized access attempt. You want to monitor for if there is any unauthorized access attempt, if there is any incoming traffic from a blacklisted IP address. You want to monitor if there is any brute force attack which is happening in your environment. You want to monitor if there is any DOS or DDoS attack which is happening in your environment. That you basically want to monitor. Security monitoring, right? You want to monitor if there is any vulnerability in your environment, if there is any malware. Malware is the term that we primarily use to define ransomware, virus, spyware, adware, and other malicious programs. So you want to monitor all of it, right? That's what security monitoring is. So these are my four types of monitoring that typically happens when it comes to monitoring. Now, if you want to specifically know the solutions that we primarily use, let's say, what do we use for infrastructure monitoring? And just imagine that you are doing all of this on premises. So for infrastructure monitoring, you have solutions like System Center from Microsoft, System Center Operations Manager. In short, I call it SCOM. You have third-party solutions from Manage Engine, which is Manage Engine Ops Manager. You have another solution, which is Vistara, and many more. These are the solutions that tools and solutions that we primarily use for monitoring infrastructure, right? Then comes network monitoring. If you want to know the solutions for network monitoring, we have solutions like PRTG. We have solutions like SolarWinds, etc. These are leaders when it comes to network monitoring. There are more. I'm just talking about one or two. So SolarWinds is basically the leader that I also have worked with extensively to configure network monitoring. Then when it comes to application monitoring, there are solutions which are like application insights, Datadog, App Dynamics, New Relic, etc. So multiple solutions for this also. And for security monitoring, you have solutions like, now security monitoring happens across multiple domains. There are multiple domains for it. For example, if you want to monitor endpoint, then for endpoint monitoring, you have solutions like CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, Falcon. Uh, you have Defender with Defender for endpoint, which is a Microsoft product. You have Semantic, McAfee, etc. This is for endpoint monitoring. Then for data leak prevention, there is different solution. For security, for log monitoring, You have solutions like QRadar, Alert Logic, Splunk, Microsoft Sentinel, Chronicle, Securonics. These are all security monitoring solutions. Then, so there are different domains within security monitoring, which is endpoint monitoring, log monitoring, data leak prevention monitoring, data governance monitoring. So depending on what kind of monitoring we are looking at, we have solutions. So this is your entire monitoring portfolio, right? This is what happens. And at some point in time in my career, I have actually worked with all of these solutions. That's the reason I still remember their name. So this is what monitoring is. Now, this is more of an infrastructure monitoring. Sorry, more of a on-premise data center monitoring. When it comes to cloud, as I said, cloud makes you multi-talented and cloud consolidate things. In cloud, you don't have to use multiple solutions. Cloud is more about consolidation. Cloud is more about enhancing end user experience. So this is all on-premises monitoring. Now, when it comes to cloud monitoring, and if I specifically talk about uh, Azure Cloud monitoring, or I say monitoring infra, application, network, and security in Azure Cloud. If it is about monitoring infra, network, and security in Azure Cloud, we have a solution with the name Azure Monitor that does all. It monitors infra, application, and network. So Azure monitors infra, application, and network. I would say three monitoring capabilities are consolidated into one solution. One Azure monitor can monitor both infrastructure, it can monitor application, it can monitor network also. And for security monitoring, you can use solutions like Microsoft Defender XDR. And this Microsoft Defender XDR comprises of multiple monitoring capabilities, which I talked about. It comprises of all of it, and it is provided in one bundle. It's like you have Microsoft Office, which contains word processing, PowerPoint, uh, and other product, email product like Outlook, Visio for design, Microsoft Teams for communication and collaboration, Yammer for social networking. So similarly, Microsoft Defender XDR contains all of these capabilities for security monitoring that you see here. All of these capabilities are in Microsoft Defender for XDR. And for infra application and network, you have Azure Monitor. So two products in Microsoft Azure space is more than sufficient to handle any business requirement with respect to monitoring and logging. Is everyone with me so far?
Yes, Raghu.
Okay. Now this Azure Monitor did not, I'm saying, it did not happen from day one that Azure Monitor was responsible for monitoring all of it. No, there was a time when Microsoft had other services also, right? For infrastructure monitoring, Microsoft would use Azure Monitor. However, for application monitoring, Microsoft has its own native solution, which used to be known as Application Insights. And for network monitoring, Microsoft has Network Watcher. These are the two solutions that Microsoft had separate solutions. As I said, Microsoft is trying to consolidate the portfolio. So what Microsoft did, Microsoft consolidated or integrated application insights and network watcher with Azure Monitor. And today Azure Monitor is one-stop shop for all infra network and application monitoring. And similarly for security monitoring, Microsoft has 20 plus solutions. 20 plus solutions which would provide a specific use case across monitoring for data monitoring, application security monitoring, data governance, identity and access management monitoring, and whatnot. So what Microsoft did, Microsoft consolidated the solution here, and Microsoft came up with Defender XDR. Now you have Zscaler Internet Access, which is a proxy solution, comes under CASB. Microsoft also has a CASB, which is Microsoft Cloud Application Security, MCAS, which is part of M365 Defender. So Microsoft tried to consolidate things. Why Microsoft is consolidating the products so that it becomes easier for customers to understand the capability, and licensing is also sorted out, because having 20 products in the portfolio and then selling them individually is a is an overhead. Unnecessarily you need to manage a lot of things, and customers sometimes do not like that, purchasing 20 different products and managing 20 different licenses. So Microsoft has now consolidated. Microsoft says that your infra, application and network monitoring requirements can be satisfied with one product. Use my Azure Monitor service, and it's not that you will only use Azure Monitor for cloud monitoring, Azure cloud monitoring. No, it's a hybrid solution. When I say hybrid, you can also use Azure Monitor to monitor on-premise servers also. On-premise server or VMs, and across cloud also. Across cloud basically means AWS, GCP, Alibaba. It's a hybrid solution. You can use this solution to monitor other environment also, which means if you have an existing license for other monitoring solutions, you can probably stop paying for them and you can use Azure Monitor as a whole. Similarly, Microsoft Defender XDR is also a hybrid solution. And when I say hybrid solution, it is not only meant for Microsoft security monitoring. You can use Defender XDR for on-premises server, application, data, IAM, and whatnot monitoring also. So Microsoft is heavily invested towards building comprehensive solution for large enterprises, because large enterprises have everything in their use case. A large enterprise would have multiple cloud service providers wherein they are hosting their infrastructure and applications. A large enterprise would need all the capabilities. So instead of purchasing separate product for each cloud service provider and for on-premises, if you give them an option that I have one product that that can do all that you need, that can satisfy your need across multiple clouds and on-premises, they would definitely take it. They would want to simplify it also. That's where Microsoft products comes into the picture. Microsoft has made their products multi-cloud, support hybrid environment in the last 4 or 5 years. And as part of that strategy, Microsoft has done all of this consolidation. So this is the history and present, and future is going to be very bright for Microsoft. Uh, it's not that I am biased for Microsoft. No, I deliver more trainings, more consulting on AWS and Azure. To be honest, that is where I get more work. But I closely monitor how Microsoft is progressing, the leadership, how they are coming up with new products and solutions, how they are doing consolidation, which I somehow feel missing in AWS and GCP. I don't see Amazon and Google Cloud working towards the same initiative. They are still focusing on making money or rolling out new products and services instead of looking at the core problem statement and trying to consolidate the product portfolio, which Microsoft is currently doing. And that is where I see a lot of interest coming from customers across Microsoft product portfolio. Even in AI domain also, Copilot, which is an AI product from Microsoft, which is now integrated with multiple Microsoft solutions. In fact, our Azure portal, if you look carefully, we have Copilot here also. So Copilot is integrated. On my system, you see Copilot also. I'm saying other service providers realizes that they are a bit late. Microsoft would capture majority of the market there. So when it comes to AI, when it comes to security, when it comes to identity, Microsoft is either a leader or on the path to becoming a leader. That's what I foresee Microsoft doing. So since you're part of Entra, you're already working with a product which is much more advanced and mature in its own segment. And the segment is identity and access management. Entra is more capable than multiple products come together and provide the capability. So Entra provides you the capabilities of ForgeRock, CyberArk, SailPoint, Savient, Ping Federate, Okta. All those capabilities you will find in Entra. So whether you purchase 10 different products or you get one license of Entra, it's one and the same thing. And that statement is true up to 90%. 10% is an exception wherein in Okta you have a specific capability which Entra doesn't have, because those are individual products and they are heavily invested in that product only. For Microsoft, Entra is just one product. They have to manage 200 plus different products. So that's about the history and present. Let's understand the configuration. So if we go to Azure Monitor, in Azure portal, if I type monitor, it will take me to this window, monitor here, and look carefully, it has everything. So it has application insights. It has application insights, which is primarily meant for monitoring your app's availability, performance, errors in usage. As I said, it has application monitoring capability. It has container insights. Container is an infrastructure part, so it can monitor containers. It has VM insights. It can monitor virtual machines. It has network insights. So it can monitor your network health and matrices also. So all the four capabilities into one solution, which is Azure Monitor. And that's exactly what you see in the documentation. So you see documentation that Azure Monitor is a comprehensive monitoring solution for collecting, analyzing, and responding to monitoring data from your cloud and on-premises environment. It says on-premises because it's a hybrid solution. I can monitor my servers, applications, and network using Azure Monitor also when they are in on-premises. Now, how does Azure Monitor works? It has sources. Sources basically means the sources from where the data is coming in or sources that you are monitoring. So it collects, route, and transform data, store them into Azure Monitor uh, Log Analytics workspace, Azure Monitor workspace, which is a storage repository for logs for real-time matrices, and then it basically respond to them some automation plus interpret. Interpret means you see the visualization on the screen. So that's what it basically does. And if you this image is explained in detail here. So you can see the data sources for Azure Monitor. The data sources are applications and workloads. When I say workloads, it could be anything. Infrastructure, which is servers, and then Azure platform. So it can also monitor Azure platform and custom sources. Anything which is not mentioned here, it can also monitor. So these sources, the data from these sources is fed into Azure Monitor. So Azure Monitor has some sort of integration with these sources. I'm saying an agent which is running here, Azure Monitor agent on these sources, which monitors these sources availability and performance based on the rules and matrices. Based on this matrices, logs, traces, and changes, which is configured in Azure Monitor, and they monitor all of it and then they present the information. So that information is presented in the form of workbooks, dashboards. You can integrate it with Power BI for visualization and Grafana also, which is a monitoring solution or which is a visualization solution, third-party solution. You can analyze these matrices using Matrix Explorer. Using Log Analytics workspace, you can store them for longer duration, change analytics, and then you can respond to these matrices also. For example, let's say there is a virtual machine which is getting monitored, and the virtual machine CPU utilization is 95%, which means the virtual machine will freeze at any moment, will stop responding. So you can also respond. Respond basically means using automation, you can quickly reboot the virtual machine, or you can quickly kill some processes using AI ops solutions. You can create an alert to the monitoring team who will quickly jump into action and see what exactly is causing higher CPU, higher resource utilization on that virtual machine. You can also auto scale, which means you can add additional virtual machines to the pool so that the application load is divided, balanced. All of this is possible using Azure Monitor. Now, Azure Monitor is also an hybrid solution, which means if you're using on-premises solutions, monitoring solutions like SCOM, which is System Center Operations Manager, using Azure Monitor, you can integrate SCOM data sets into Azure. So all that SCOM is monitoring can be ingested into Azure Monitor, and then in Azure Monitor, you can see your visualization. It also works with Power BI for visualization, as I said, and you can integrate Azure Monitor with solutions like Event Hub. So using Event Hub, you can forward Azure Monitor the data that it collects to a third-party solution, or using the same service, you can stream data from third-party solutions into Azure Monitor. It integrates with Azure Storage so that you can store the logs in Azure. It integrates with third-party solutions which are registered, which are validated by Microsoft. It integrates with export import APIs, logic apps. So you have already seen in virtual machine logic app is there in the automation. So that also has Azure Monitor. Then integrates with functions, serverless computing. It integrates with Azure DevOps, and it integrates with GitHub also, which is a source code repository. So this is the high level architecture of Azure Monitor service, which summarizes in detail the capability that it brings on the table. Any question on this high level architecture of Azure Monitor, guys? All right, let's move on. Now, one thing that you need to understand is collection method. So how Azure Monitor is collecting data. So Azure Monitor, if it is application insights, application performance monitoring. So Azure Monitor basically collects data from agents. So you deploy Azure Monitor agent on data sources. Agent is nothing but a small executable, small application that you download and install on the data source. You can also push that agent directly from Azure portal if your data source has clear line of sights with Azure. And then you configure data collection rule. These are the two things that you do: agent and data collection rule. So with the help of data collection rule, you tell Azure Monitor what I want to collect or what you want to collect. Whether you want to collect performance logs, whether you want to collect, event logs for security monitoring. So these are the two things that you need to be aware of. Then comes, what are these things? So you need to understand all these four components of Azure Monitor. The first is Azure Monitor matrices. What are matrices? Matrices are numerical values that describe an aspect of a system at a particular point in time. It's very heavy statement. In a layman language, you can understand matrices is a current trend. So if there's a server running, what is your CPU utilization? Somebody says 95%. That's matrix. What is memory utilization? Somebody says out of 8 GB, 6 GB memory is utilized. So that 6 GB is matrix. So real-time performance detail of a system, real-time performance measured in numerical value is matrix. It is measured in numerical value. Then logs. Logs are historical events that happened in the past. Those are logs. And logs are recorded from system events. In our laptop or in any server, we have a solution, we have a capability like event viewer. This is event viewer. Here all the logs are stored. All the logs related to Windows, application, security, setup, system, all the logs related to applications which are deployed in my system like Microsoft Office, key management service, all these applications. So this solution basically collect logs from event logs. Then comes traces. Traces basically means that when you want to collect something in real time, something once, that's what traces is. And then changes are basically the change in the configuration of a system. So these are the four pillars of observability, or four pillars of Azure Monitor, which powers Azure Monitor for its capabilities. That's it. How Azure Monitor looks like on Azure portal. This is what it shows. And then rest of the thing, let's understand from Azure portal. So what are we going to do as a hands-on lab here? We are going to So what we are going to do here is we are going to uh, configure monitoring for virtual machine, virtual network, and storage account using Azure Monitor and look at certain aspects. That's the hands-on lab that we need to do as part of this exercise. This is the hands-on lab that we're going to do. Provision and configure Azure Monitor for virtual machines, network, and storage account. So let's start with virtual machines. So this is how Azure Monitor looks like. Now, if you want to configure Azure Monitor for virtual machines, the first thing that you need to make sure is that virtual machine should be up and running, because there are two ways to configure Azure Monitor for virtual machines. If that virtual machine is part of Azure, then you can directly configure monitoring of that virtual machine from virtual machine blade also. Okay, so in the virtual machine blade, when you go down, you will see monitoring. Here you see insights. If your virtual machine is containing any application, you can configure insights for it. Matrices, which tells you the near real-time performance of the virtual machine, CPU, memory utilization as we speak. This is where you can configure it, Azure Monitor. This is one way of doing it. But what if you have 1,000 virtual machines in your environment? Will you navigate to each virtual machine one after another and configure the monitoring? No. In that case, you can configure the monitoring from Azure Monitor dashboard for 1,000 virtual machines in one go. How? This is how we do it. So what we will do in Azure Monitor, under Insights, there is an option with the name Data Collection Rules. No, it's not there in Insights. Where is Data Collection Rule? Over here, under Settings. So under Settings, you see Data Collection Rule. You will configure a data collection rule, and that data collection rule will, in that data collection rule, you will define how many systems I want to monitor and what exactly I want to monitor against those systems. So this is how we create data collection rule. We navigate to Azure Monitor Service. Under settings, we navigate to data collection rules, and then we hit create. Here you see the rule name. We can say DCR, data collection rule demo. Then we select our resource group. Now, it doesn't mean that you will select this resource group and only resources of this resource group can be monitored. No, every service that you create in Azure requires a container service for hosting its configuration. So that's why we need a resource group. Then we select a region. So Azure Monitor is a regional service, which means if you have virtual machines across multiple regions, then for each region, you will need to configure Azure Monitor. So let's say my VM is in Canada Central. I will configure Azure Monitor in Canada Central. Then you will need to provide platform. Whether you want to, whether you are creating this data collection rule for Windows, for Linux, or for all. It is a best practice to create separate collection rules for Windows and separate collection rule for Linux servers. Why? Because their architecture is different. Their monitoring data is different. So let's say I select Windows. So I'm creating it for Windows. Then click on next. Just leave this data collection endpoint as it is. Click on next. On the next page, you will need to add all the virtual machines, Windows virtual machines, for which you are creating with this data collection rule. So here I will click on add resource, and it will populate all the virtual machines that I have in this subscription. So you can see here, it shows my subscription, and then it shows the resource groups, and then I will see all my virtual machines here. So since I only have one virtual machine as we speak, I will select that virtual machine. If there are 1,000 virtual machines, you can select those 1,000 virtual machines also in one go, and then hit apply. So this is how you select the source that you want to monitor. So when you select those virtual machines, they start to appear here. It says only resources in the same region can be assigned. Now this is another thing. So if you have resources across multiple regions, you need to create multiple data collection rules, one for each region. So after you select the virtual machines, next is what exactly you want to collect. That's the next question. So over here, you will select a data source. You will add a data source. So add data source, and then it will ask you what kind of data source you want to add. So there are two types of data source right now, which is performance counters and event logs. So I can select performance counters, and I say that, okay, on my virtual machine, I want to capture performance. Performance of CPU, memory, disk, and network. If you feel that this is not sufficient, we need more, then you can click on custom, and then it will show you in detail all the performance counters. You can see there are almost 12 performance counters. There are a total of 46 performance counters that you can monitor in real time. And these are most common, which most of the customers measure, which is CPU, memory, disk, and network. And it also shows you the sample rate. Sample rate basically means how frequently Azure Monitor will collect performance sample from that machine. So by default, it's 60 seconds. You can reduce it or increase it also. So in the performance counter, I'm telling Azure that please go ahead and collect all of these matrices from my VM. CPU, memory, disk, and network utilization of my VM in near real time. I'm using near word along with real time. Why? Because nothing is real time. Everything is near real time. When you watch a live cricket match, it's a near real time. It's almost 100%, but not 100%. It cannot be, you cannot watch something, I'm saying as it happens, if it is online. Even when I'm telling when I'm saying something, there is a delay of a couple of milliseconds. I would not say that there's a delay of 1 minute or 20 seconds, but yes, there is a delay. When I speak, it reaches you in some time. It could be in milliseconds, but there is a delay. That is where we call it near real time. By the time you receive the data, it will not be the real time situation. It would be a situation which was probably there a couple of seconds ago. So I'm collecting performance counters. Next, when you collect the counters, so you're collecting these counters, but you need to store it somewhere. So you need to provide the destination also. So here we will add destinations. For that, I will say use Azure Monitor Logs. However, for this, you need a workspace. Now, what is a workspace here? Workspace is a log repository. It is like a storage account service. The difference between storage account and workspace is that workspace store logs in the form of tables, and then you can run a query to read logs from that table. That query is known as KQL, Custo Query Language, which is similar to SQL. SQL is structure query language that you run queries on databases, SQL databases. So what I will do, I will duplicate the tab and I will create a workspace and then come back to this window and provide that workspace. Because without a workspace, you cannot configure the monitoring. So for workspace, now workspace is your logging service. So I will go to Log Analytics Workspace Service. This is the log repository service in Azure that we use. So I'll hit create. All I need is to select the resource group, name of the workspace. I would say demo workspace, and select the region as Canada Central. That's it, and review plus create. So creation of workspace is the first step, which we are doing along with configuring the provisioning. So it will take less than a minute to provision the workspace. So what it does, it basically creates a log repository. And the old name of workspace service is Microsoft Log Analytics OMS. OMS stands for Operations Management Suite. Until 2019, so in 2016, Microsoft launched a solution with the name OMS, which had multiple capabilities delivered through a SaaS service. It did not work well, so Microsoft discontinued it. That's what OMS is. So my workspace is created. I can go back to this window now. I can close it. And then I can once again click on add data source. Select my data source as performance counter. Then click on next, click on add destination and specify Azure Monitor Logs and select my workspace, which I've just created, which is demo workspace. So what it will do, it will collect all those performance counters from the VMs that I've selected in the previous step, and it will store those performance counters into this workspace. That's it. I will add this data source. So I've added the performance counters. Similarly, I can also add my event logs, which is equally important. I also want to monitor event logs so that I will know if there are any failed logon attempt to my servers, if there is any application which is getting critical, all that. So if I click on custom, then I can monitor anything. So I will click on basic, it summarizes everything. So what I want to monitor, I want to monitor any critical error and warning. I want to monitor any audit failure. Success is okay. I don't want to monitor. Failure basically means somebody tries to log into the server and it fails. It will be reported under audit failure log. If he or she is successful, it is audit success. So what is the point of monitoring when things are right? You want to monitor what is not right. So you will monitor audit failure. And then for a system, for that machine, I want to monitor all critical error and warning. Now, what's the difference between system and application here? This is the application which is installed on the machine. All the applications which are installed. And this is the machine itself, the operating system itself. So anything related to operating system criticality, error, and warning, I want to monitor, and all the applications and security related logs also. So that's my event monitoring. And same, it also requires to be stored somewhere. So I will add the same destination, which is my demo workspace, which I created. So I've added this data source. So this is how you create a data collection rule in Azure Monitor. As part of that data collection rule, you define all the virtual machines or services that you want to monitor, and then what exactly you want to monitor in those services, you define in the collect and deliver phase. That's it. Click on next. Same, you will get tags option. If you want to put any tags, you can put. Okay, then click on next, review plus create. Done. Hit create. So it is creating a data collection rule involving all the virtual machines that I want to monitor, as well as what I want to monitor in those virtual machines. So that's the concept of monitoring virtual machines in Azure Monitor. Now this data collection rule deployment is complete. It says create data collection rule association succeeded. So when this deployment is complete, what Azure Monitor will do in the backend? Azure Monitor will go ahead and install, and now this virtual machine will start to appear here in some time. Azure Monitor will go ahead and install Azure Monitor Agent on all the virtual machines that you have selected in the data collection rule. And probably it says not onboarded. What happened? One or more workspaces is not onboarded to VM Insights. That's okay. So after some time, probably next couple of minutes, you will start to see performance data, coming here in Azure Monitor for your virtual machines. However, in order to see that performance data to come here, there has to be some performance. If nothing is happening on that virtual machine, then obviously you will not see any data. But if you want to see real-time data of that machine, you can see that here. So for example, I want to see the real-time data of my virtual machine for this virtual machine. And I will hit apply. Now I can see real-time data of this virtual machine. This is another capability of Azure Monitor. So let's say I want to see uh, the CPU utilization right now. Or so I can say this is all the data, real-time data that I can see of my virtual machines, memory utilization, CPU utilization, availability. So I want to see the memory utilization of my virtual machine. It shows the memory utilization right now. So you can see, and I can also see the average, minimum, maximum, all that for this machine. So I can see average memory utilization, and I can see this information for the last up to last 90 days. So let's see the information for last 48 hours of this virtual machine. So it shows you the memory utilization for last 48 hours of this virtual machine. So memory utilization has been close to 5, over here. This is the memory utilization trend of this virtual machines. So this is what real-time matrices is. I can see real-time matrix. I can add matrix and see additional information here. I can see that in line chart. I can also see the area chart, line chart. These are different visualizations in which I can see the data like this. I can see that data in bar chart and grid. I can also see the data in form of grid. So this is how I can see the visualization actually. So this is how we monitor the virtual machine. This is how we configure the virtual machine monitoring in Azure Monitor. If there are multiple virtual machines, then you can configure the monitoring using data collection rule. If there is only one virtual machine, then you can directly navigate to that virtual machine, and under monitoring, you can configure the insights for it. So this is how we provision. This is how we provision and configure monitoring for virtual machine. Any questions so far, guys? Is everyone with me on this?
Yes,
Yes.
Raghu.
Okay, let's move on. Now let's see how do we configure monitoring for storage account. That is very simple. If you want to configure monitoring for any service other than virtual machine, it's very simple. Just navigate to that service. For example, I want to configure monitoring for this storage account. Navigate to that service and you will have an option under monitoring that says diagnostic settings. Click on diagnostic settings and configure the monitoring. So right now, this storage account contains 4 data sources: blob, queue, table, and file. Whether there is any data there or not is a different thing, but these are the 4 things. So let's say you want to configure the monitoring. If you want to configure the monitoring for all of these 4 services, then you need to click on storage account name over here and add the monitoring. If you want to configure the monitoring for one of the service, then you need to click on that service only. For example, I only want to configure the monitoring for blob, then I will click on blob only and it will configure the monitoring for blob. So let's say I want to configure the monitoring for my entire storage account. So I will click on the storage account name and then it says add diagnostic settings. So I will click on add diagnostic settings and here what exactly do you monitor in storage account is the transaction. So you will select transaction. You will provide a name. I'll say demo storage account. And there are 4 options to monitor. If you want to monitor using Azure Monitor, then you will send it to Log Analytics workspace. The same Log Analytics workspace that you created, which is integrated with Azure Monitor, which is demo workspace. If you only want to store logs, I'm saying you want to store logs related to transactions on your storage account, but you don't want to visualize them. You don't want to get the matrices in near real time. Then you can select the second option, which is archive to a storage account, which is just storing the logs. Keep storing the logs. Whenever I need, I will come to this place and view it. Third, you can stream it to an event hub. Event hub basically is a streaming service. After it is streamed to event hub, from event hub, you can stream it further to a third party solution. And then fourth, send to partner solution. You can directly send to partner solution. For that, you need to integrate the solution here. Let's say you want to send these storage logs to QRadar. So you will need to integrate QRadar first with Azure, and then you can select it from the drop down, and the logs will directly be streamed to QRadar. So these are my 4 monitoring options for storage account. If it is about Azure Monitor, we'll go with the first option, which is send to Log Analytics workspace, a workspace that is integrated with Azure Monitor. That's it. Click on save and you are good to go. So this is configured. Diagnostic is configured for this storage account. Similarly, you can configure for other storage accounts. Now in Azure Monitor view, there is no, for example, you can see storage accounts here. It also shows you the storage accounts basically. It says that there are 3 storage accounts and you can see that I've just configured monitoring for this storage account. So it starts to show some data here. So here you see the near real-time matrices of storage accounts. So there are 3 storage accounts. This is the current transaction status. This is the latency and other details. But for the storage account, I've also configured the detailed monitoring in Log Analytics workspace. Similarly, if you want to configure the monitoring for network, then you can also configure the monitoring for network. Now, network monitoring is here. You can see under after containers, there's a network monitoring. You can click on it and it shows you all the networks that you have, right? So you can see here that there is one network. There are 5 network security groups. There is one public IP. There is one route table and there are 5 networks. There is one network interface and 5 virtual networks. So it shows you a bird eye view of your environment basically. And if you want to see the topology, you can also see the topology of your network. So you can see I have some networks in East US, some networks in Canada Central, and some networks in South India. And those networks are also paired right now. This arrow basically shows the pairing. So with South India, the network in East US and Canada is paired. That's network topology that it shows. You can download this topology if you want to share it with your management. Now, if you want to see those 5 networks, they will be shown here. So this network view will show you the real time, near real time information of your network. So there are 5 networks that we see here, 3 networks in South India, 1 in US and 1 in Canada. All that you see here. If you want to see any alerts related to network, you will see them here. Right now, there is no alert because it's a lab environment and things are really smooth. We don't have anything to bother about. So this is how network monitoring is configured. You want to see connectivity, you will see the connectivity information here. Right now, there is no alert, nothing is bad here. You want to see how traffic is moving, you can see the traffic also. So for example, Canada Central, here's the traffic. The configuration right now, since you've not configured, that's the reason it shows red cross. So when you want to configure it, let's say I want to configure for this network. So I'll click on this network and it takes me to the NSG here. So this is how we configure the network monitoring. Let's say you want to configure it for this network. You navigate to network and then under monitoring, you see diagnostic settings here. You will click on diagnostic settings. The same process, add diagnostic settings, select all logs from this network, all matrices about this network, and send it to the same log analytics workspace, demo workspace, and save it. So anything that goes into that workspace will be, because that workspace is connected to Azure Monitor, it will automatically start to populate in Azure Monitor, or Azure Monitor will automatically be able to monitor that service. That's how we do it. So we have just configured the monitoring for network also, for storage account also. So this is how we configure the monitoring. Now, after the monitoring is configured, and if you want to see near real-time information, if you want to query logs, then you will get into the option which is logs. So when you click on logs, it basically takes you to the log analytics workspace, which is integrated with Azure Monitor. So this is my log analytics workspace, which is integrated with Azure Monitor. And in this log analytics workspace, I will see all my events. Now, this is too quick because once you configure the monitoring, you need to give it at least a couple of hours to collect data from various systems, and then you will be able to see the logs, run queries on those logs. That's how it happens. Since we have just configured the monitoring probably a couple of minutes ago, we will not find any logs here, right? However, if I want to find if there is any virtual machine that has been added, I can type heartbeat. So this is now what I'm doing is known as KQL, Kusto query language. I can type queries here and those queries will show me the results. So if I want to check heartbeat, which is coming from any virtual machine in this in this log analytics workspace, I can type heartbeat and I can run this query. And it will show me if there is any virtual machine that is sending logs to this log analytics workspace. So you can see the moment I type heartbeat, I start to get response. And from which VM I'm getting the heartbeat? VM1 Entra ID. And this is the VM which I configured for monitoring a couple of minutes ago. So which means my monitoring is working, which means my VM is onboarded into Azure Monitor and VM logs are actually coming into log analytics workspace. That is the reason this VM is sending heartbeat. And I can get all the information about this VM, which is the VM. You can see remote IP, longitude, at latitude, all that, geographic information of the VM, subscription ID, resource group to this VM is part of, VM name, resource ID, VM compute environment, it is in Azure. Similarly, when you monitor on-premise VMs, AWS VMs, GCP VMs, when you run the heartbeat command, you will see those VMs, and against those VMs compute environment, you will see on-premise, Azure, AWS, GCP, all that you will see here. The IP address of the VM, private IP, all that information you will see. This is known as KQL, Custo Query Language, querying the logs. This is what I'm doing. I'm querying the logs. I'm trying to query the logs. So there are multiple queries. You don't need to remember things in Azure. A couple of things are already here. So right now it has created three tables: event table, heartbeat table, and performance table. Because if you remember, that's what we have configured. We have configured event log for virtual machines. We have configured heartbeat is automatically created and performance log. So in these tables, it is storing all of this data. And if you want to see sample queries, you can click here on the queries and you will see sample queries also. These are all sample queries you have. For example, I want to check last heartbeat of each computer. Each computer which is getting monitored using Azure Monitor, when was the last time it reported to Azure Monitor? So I can just double click on this query and it automatically comes into this query editor field. All I need to do is run this query and it will show me the last heartbeat of each computer. So when I run it, I only get one result because I only have one machine added or configured for monitoring. So it shows this is the last heartbeat of this computer, which is VM1 Entra ID, and it was generated. It was coming on this time. Now this is UTC time basically. So you can see all the information about this machine. Similarly, if you want to see logical disk space, percentage below threshold, malware detection, I'm saying you have multiple queries here. If you want to see not reporting VMs, let's say you have added 1,000 VMs in Azure Monitor for monitoring. However, some VMs are not reporting. Maybe because they do not have connectivity, they have connectivity issues, they are stopped. There could be n number of reasons because they are not reporting, and you want to quickly generate a report. You want to quickly query out of 1,000 VMs, how many of them are not reporting. Just double click on this query. The query will run, and you can also set the time range in query. So right now it says all the VMs who have not reported in the last 5 minutes. The time frame is 5 minutes. If you want to find out the information of last 1 hour, you can put the time range manually here. So it will show you all the VMs, those have not reported in the last 1 hour. Now, when I run this query, I will find no data because I only have one VM uh, onboarded in Azure Monitor, and that too is reporting as we speak. That's the reason we are getting the data or heartbeat of that VM. So when I run this query, I will not get any result. It says no result. Why? Because all the VMs that you are monitoring, they are reporting. So there is no not reporting VM. So that's how you can. So these are all queries. They are known as sample queries that you have. You want to see all shutdown VMs. Let's say all the VMs which are currently shut down. Just double click on this. It will quickly. So it will see in the last 10 minutes. You want to change the time frame. Let's say I want to know all the virtual machines in Azure. Those have been shut down in the last 24 hours. So I select time range as 24 hours. And now I will run this query, though I will not get any result because I don't have any shutdown machine in Azure. But this is how you run the query. So this is how we query the logs after we configure, after we onboarded these services in Azure Monitor, after those services have been there in Azure Monitor for a quality amount of time. And then if we want to get some real-time info or some some data from the previous trends of those machines, I can come to logs, I can run queries. I have a couple of sample queries, or I can learn KQL language and write queries myself. And then I can run the query and I can get the result. If there is any query that you run most of the time as an admin, then you can save that query also. So you can build a query, you can customize a query and then save it. Once you save a query, then it shows under Query Hub. So let's say you run this query every day. So you can save this query in the Query Hub. I can say shutdown machine like this, and it says save. So I can select the tag and all that and save this query. So once the query is saved, then I don't need to search for this query. I can directly go to Query Hub. I will see the query there. I can double click on it and run. That's how we work with the Gusto query language. Any questions so far? All right, let's move on. Now, next is, let's say you want to, so this is all passive monitoring now. We are not sending any information to monitoring team. We are not generating any alert. But if you want to generate an alert for a specific behavior that happens in your environment, for example, if there are not reporting VM, there are some VMs which are not reporting, and you want to generate an alert and send it to your monitoring team so that they can investigate why those VMs are not reporting. Are they shut down? Are they experiencing some network or connectivity issue? For that, you can create an alert. So for each query result that you get, let's say last heartbeat of each computer. So this is the query. In order to create an alert, the query must return a result first. So since this query is returning the result, and if I want to create an alert, I can click on new alert rule, and I can create an alert for this query also. This is how I can create an alert. So if I want to create an alert, let's say for a virtual machine whose CPU utilization is more than 90%, and that virtual machine happens to be a critical system in my environment, which is hosting a mission critical application. And I want that virtual machine to be up and running all the time. Having 90% plus CPU utilization may corrupt my virtual machine, may cause it to reboot, may freeze my virtual machine, which will impact the application. So how can I measure it? I can configure it from here by writing an alert, by writing a query and then creating an alert from it, or I can do it from here also. I can go to Azure Monitor and I can click on alerts. Here I can write alert rules. So let's see how do we write an alert rule. I can click on create alert rule. And here I can select the scope. Scope basically means for whom I'm creating the alert. So let's say I want to create an alert for a VM, then I will select that VM. That VM is here. So I'll select my scope. My scope is this VM. I'll apply. So my scope is selected. Then I will need to select the condition. On what condition or for what situation or condition I'm creating an alert. So I select condition from here. So let's say percentage CPU utilization I want to configure an alert for. So I select percentage CPU. Then it will say what is your logic? How do you want to monitor it? Or at what scenario you want to create an alert? So I'll say when the average CPU utilization is greater than 95% for this VM. Average CPU utilization is greater than 95%. It means the VM is about to get corrupted or about to get failed. How quickly it should check? Check every minute and look back period is 5 minutes. So it will check every minute the average CPU utilization. If it is 95%, then I can add a condition. I can add additional condition also for this VM. At the same time, I will check available memory. At the same time, I will also check available memory of this VM. So I can combine two alerts into one, or I can only create one alert. That's totally up to you, right? So let's say I'm only going with one alert, which is I want to check CPU utilization. So if the CPU utilization of the VM is more than 95%, then what action it will take? So it is monitoring the VM for CPU utilization. If the CPU utilization is more than 95%, then what action it will take? That action will be defined in the action group. So you need to create an action group. Action group basically means whether you want to reboot the VM, whether you want to send that information to monitoring team so that quickly they create an incident and they look into it. So we'll create an action group here. Demo action group, display name I can keep the same. Yeah, I cannot go beyond 12 characters, which is okay. Notifications. So what kind of action I want to take, that is defined in the action group. So in the action group, you can see email Azure Resource Manager, email, SMS, push, voice. So I'll say email. And here I'll select the email and I'll say, okay, if the CPU utilization of this VM, average CPU utilization of this VM in the last 1 minute is 95%, then quickly send an email to this team. I'm just putting a generic email address, monitoring@tcs.com. So this DL will receive this alert, and this alert will get converted into an incident when it comes to this DL. I can also send an SMS. I can send a mobile app notification. I can also send a phone call. All of this capability are available. So I'll say go ahead and do this email part. And I put the email here, TCS Infra Monitoring Team. Next action. So it will send an email to the team. Do you also want to take some action? Action in the sense, these are the actions. You can create a logic app to reboot the VM. You can create an Azure automation to shut down the VM. I'm saying when the VM CPU utilization is 95% and above in the last 5 minutes, send an email to that team. And what next? Probably nothing or one of these. Shut down the VM, reboot the VM, or anything that you want to do. So that's the action. So right now we don't want to take any action. So I'll just leave it blank. Then next tag and review plus create. This is what action group is all about. So now the action group will be created. So what will happen for this kind of rule? It will go ahead and send an email to this email address, whichever I've created. In the end, next is detail. Here I will type the detail. I will define the severity. I will say it's critical because it's my mission critical VM. It's going to fail at 95% CPU utilization. I can put the alert rule, which is this is the name that will come in when the email goes. This rule name will be there in the subject line of the email. So percentage CPU utilization is beyond acceptable threshold. In the description, I can copy the same or I can put something else in the description. Advanced options is or if I want to put some custom properties. Next is tag and review plus create. So that way I can create an alert rule which will trigger based on certain matrices. And what that matrix is, average CPU utilization in the last 5 minutes more than 95%. That's the matrix. So that's how I create alert rules. So one alert rule is created. And since the alert rule is created, it will show you all the alerts. Now, obviously, that alert will not come because I will not be able to reach 95% CPU utilization on a machine wherein I'm not even logged into, where there is absolutely nothing happening. However, if in a production environment, you will see all the alerts here. And if you want to create more alert rules, you can click on alert rules, which will show you all the alert rules that are currently created. And then you can hit create. Now I show you alert rule for one VM, right? If you want to create alert rule for multiple VMs in one go, instead of selecting the scope as that VM, you can select the scope as subscription. And then you can create a common alert rule for multiple resources. That is also possible. Now the best practice says create an alert rule for individual system because the cost is low. If you remember when we were creating an alert rule, it was showing us the cost also. I'll show you once again. So the cost is like, what is the, yeah, over here. You can see the cost here. So this is the cost of this alert rule, which is 10 cents per month. 0.10 US dollar per month is 10 cents, 10 paisa per month. So to monitor CPU utilization and generate alert when it goes beyond 95% for this VM is 10 paisa per minute. So if I create the same alert rule for 1000 VMs, then 10 into 1000, which is approximately $100 per month. But I may not need the same condition for all the VMs. That is why it is recommended in Azure to create an alert rule for an individual resource rather than a group of resources. Is everyone with me on this?
Yes, Ravi.
Okay, so this is all about logging and monitoring. That's all I wanted to cover so that you have a fair idea of how do we onboard the core services into Azure Monitor, how do we create data collection rules, how do we configure log analytics workspace, how do we run KQL queries, and then how do we create an alert rule based on KQL queries or normal alert rule based on our own custom configurations. That's what I wanted to cover when it comes to logging and monitoring. Now, as I said, the one thing that you need to remember is what. Give me a moment here. Okay, so if we go back to the log analytics workspace, read this statement from Azure. I'm saying it says August 31st, 2024, which is past now. So as I said that what Microsoft is trying to do, Microsoft is trying to deprecate log analytics workspace and merge it with Azure Monitor. And the deadline was August 31st, 2024 for some of the capabilities, which has already gone past. So those capabilities are no more available in Log Analytics workspace. And those capabilities are here. I'll show you this legacy agent management. See, it says it won't be supported on this date. Legacy activity connector, uh, legacy storage account logs, whatever it says legacy, it was not legacy. It used to be only agent management, activity log connector, storage account connector. Now it says legacy, legacy, legacy. Why it says legacy, legacy? Because Azure wants you to stop configuring these options from here. Azure wants you to start configuring these options from Azure Monitor. So Azure has put them under legacy. So very soon you will not have this service uh, available for monitoring. The entire capability of this service will be integrated with Azure Monitor. So you if you configure monitoring for an Azure resource, any resource, then make sure that you configure the monitoring from Azure Monitor, not from Log Analytics Workspace. That's what you need to know as another thing. However, this service still good for logging. If you want to store logs, then logs will be stored on this service only. And in fact, if you heard about Microsoft Sentinel or QRadar, Splunk, Alert Logic, those are logging solutions. They heavily depend on logs because they analyze the logs, misconfigurations or vulnerabilities into the logs, and basis on that they generate security incident. So that for that this service will continue to run. That's the only use case of this service. So this is about all logging and monitoring. We'll take a break now and then we will start with the last topic of today, which is auditing. How do we audit our Azure environment? What all services are available for audit and how do we make use of it? Hear me, guys?
Yes.
Okay, let's get started. All right, last topic for today is auditing. Auditing and security. I would say security assessment in Azure. So auditing and security assessment in Azure, how we do it. Okay, another thing from monitoring perspective, when it comes to Entra sign-in logs and Entra audit logs, they are also streamed into Log Analytics Workspace. However, how do we stream it is a different method altogether. When you navigate to here, Microsoft Entra IDE, and when you see these under troubleshoot and support, I'm saying under monitoring, it says sign-in logs and audit logs. These logs are streamed into Log Analytics Workspace. However, if you want to monitor them using Microsoft Sentinel, then we click on Export Data Settings. So this is where we basically export it. So these logs are by default shown here. Audit logs and sign-in logs and audit logs are by default present here, and they are present here for the last 90 days, right? For last 90 days, they are present here. For example, I can see that Romil is actually logging into this subscription. So I can see a success under sign-in logs. I can see a sign-in logs whose status is success. Here's the IP address with which he's logged in from Noida, Uttar Pradesh, right? So I can see that information in the sign-in logs. Now this is shown here for the last 90 days. If I want to store them for a longer duration, or if I want to perform some queries, for that, I need to export them into Log Analytics Workspace, the same Log Analytics Workspace which I've created, which is Export Data Settings. Click on Add Diagnostic Settings. Here, select what kind of logs I want to store. So I can select audit logs, sign-in logs. There are other logs also, risky users log, user risk events. These are some of the service principal risk events. If I want to store Office 365 logs, I can also do that. So all of these logs, risky service principal, all of these logs I can select. I can give it a name, demo, enter logs, send to log analytics workspace, the same workspace, demo workspace, which I've created, and save it. Now what will happen? All of these logs will be streamed or stored into that workspace. And there it will be stored for a longer duration, which is default is 2 years. And if you need a longer retention, then you can integrate workspace with Azure Data Explorer to get 100 years of log retention. And then the benefit of putting them into log analytics workspace is that you can run queries. Those KQL queries you can run, and you can also configure alerts against these logs. That is the benefit of configuring them into log analytics workspace. Otherwise, by default, you will continue to see them here. Same is the case with audit logs also. You can click on export data settings. You can add diagnostic settings, and you can put demo, Entra, audit logs. Select what logs you want to capture. So right now I only want to capture. So I have already captured those in the previous settings, so which means you don't need to configure it again, because the previous one contains this already, because the same options were there in the previous configuration. You don't need to configure the audit logs. It will automatically be captured here with sign-in logs here that you have configured. This also contains, you can click on edit settings and you can see I'm already capturing audit logs and sending them to here. So this is another thing that you need to know. Okay, let's talk about auditing, security assessment in Azure. So for auditing in Azure, there are multiple services. There used to be a service with the name Azure Security Center. A service with this name, Azure Security Center. Microsoft renamed it last year, and the new name of the service is now Microsoft Defender for Cloud, formerly known as Azure Security Center. This is the service that basically helps you to audit or assess security in your Azure environment. So Microsoft Defender for Cloud Service, this service falls under CSPM category. CSPM stands for Cloud Security Posture Management. Zscaler also has CSPM capability with the name Zscaler CSPM. It used to be a solution with the name Cloud Niti. Cloud Niti solution was developed. I was part of that solution build team. So we built that solution. We were the first team back in 2016 who came up with this concept of cloud security posture management, that we need to monitor Azure cloud for its security configuration, and then probably need a solution that can automatically monitor it and report if there is any misconfiguration. So the byproduct of that thought process was Cloud Niti. And then Cloud Niti was acquired by Zscaler. I would say the company was acquired by Zscaler, and then Zscaler white labeled it as its own CSPM solution. So the same CSPM solution in Azure is now Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Now, what this solution does, this solution basically this solution basically audit the cloud service. Uh, this solution audit the cloud configuration. When I say cloud configuration, basically your subscription configuration, that how have you configured your cloud subscriptions. So it monitors cloud service, cloud subscription configuration. It monitors your cloud services configuration. It audits basically against Microsoft Cloud MCRA, Microsoft Cloud, Microsoft Cloud Security Framework. Give me a moment. They have changed the name. Let me see the name. Azure is very notorious to change the name. Microsoft Cloud Security framework. Oh, MCSB. It's now MCSB. It's Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks. Cloud Security Benchmarks. So that's what the name of the solution is. So it basically audits your cloud configuration against Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks. And what is Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks? They are a set of best practices provided by Microsoft Azure for cloud service configuration. That's what it does. So let's see the solution directly so that you will see what the solution does. So if we navigate to on our Azure portal, if we navigate to Defender, it says Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender has multiple varieties. Defender for external attack surface management, Defender for IoT, and Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud basically contains all the capabilities. So this is my Defender for Cloud. And in this Defender for Cloud, I can see the security posture. Yeah, I can go to recommendations here. And here you see, these are all the best practices if you see right now. Now you and Defender for Cloud, as I said, Microsoft products are multi-cloud products. Microsoft is building multi-cloud products, wherein you will see that Defender for Cloud is not only for Azure. It can also protect AWS accounts, GCP projects, GitHub, Azure DevOps, GitLab, Docker. So slowly and gradually, Azure is adding more third-party solutions to the purview of Defender. So if you are a customer who have been using Azure, AWS, GCP, all the three clouds, then you can use Defender for Cloud for monitoring. Now these are the recommendations that you see. And it also shows you affected resource. It shows you the score also, but it's just that you will need to enable the, so here you can see right now my security score is 35%, security score dashboard. That is what Defender for Cloud does. That is why we call it cloud security posture management or auditing solution. So all the configurations that you have done in Azure with respect to uh, configuring RBAC, with respect to Entra ID configuration, with respect to service configuration like virtual machines, virtual networks, storage accounts, all the configurations that you have done, if those configurations are against the best practices, which are mentioned in Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, MCSB, then it will report recommendation against it, non-compliance against it, and it will also affect your score. So if your cloud configuration is as per the best practices, then your total score will be more than 90%. If it is not as per the best practices, then your total score will be low. Now, if you see my total score right now is 35%, which basically means it's a really bad score. I am really not going as per the cloud security configuration or audit configuration. So if I want to know where exactly I'm not doing it right, what did I misconfigure because of which my score is getting impacted, I can click on view recommendations. So this shows me, so it performs an audit of my Azure subscription and it shows me a couple of recommendations here. So these are all the recommendations which I have, and these recommendations shows me the affected resources also, right? So there is one recommendation which says that your Windows virtual machine should enable Azure disk encryption. So it says that this virtual machine has a disk associated with it and you have not enabled encryption of the disk, which is a misconfiguration. Since encryption is not enabled, there is a probability of data leak. So it is giving me a recommendation. So it has performed an audit of my cloud subscription, my Azure subscription. It has performed an audit of all the services and resources that I have provisioned in the subscription. And basis on that audit, it has it has analyzed the configuration, the current configuration against the security best practices, and it is providing me a recommendation so that I can follow the recommendations and I can increase my secure score. I can try and take it more than 90%. 100% secure score is not possible because for 100%, you will need to purchase some additional solutions from Azure that you would not like. But any score which is 90% and above is a great score. So that's what you need to strive. Then if you see on the subscription configuration, I'm missing a security email address. It says subscription should have a contact email address for security issue. So if there are any security violations, Microsoft should have an email address to which it can quickly notify you. So that email address is missing, that contact email address is missing. So it has quickly audited the environment, looked for it. It did not find that email address. It is putting into the recommendation. Similarly, if you move further, you will see that I have a couple of recommendations for storage accounts. For example, the first recommendation, it says storage account should restrict access using virtual network rules. So it is giving me the recommendation. I can click on the recommendation and it will give me the details of that recommendation, what that recommendation is all about, what is the context behind it, what will happen if I don't follow that recommendation. All that information will come here. So what this recommendation is, this recommendation says that my storage account is publicly accessible. I should restrict access of my storage account to my network using virtual network rules. The second radio button, if you remember, which is restrict access of your storage account to a certain network and IP address. That's what it is asking me to do. Now, not all recommendations is mandatory. What if you have intentionally created a public facing storage account to share some data with public at large, like safety manuals, drivers, then it's a intended behavior. So we can always create an exception. So this is how we look at the recommendation. You can see the action also. It says this is the action that you need to take. And if you want to exempt, you can click on exempt also. So for example, if I'm 100% sure that this action is intended and legitimate, then I can create an exception here for this storage account. I can create an expiration date of this exception also, that this exception is valid only for the end of this year, so that I can after 31st December 2024, on January 1st 2025, Defender for Cloud will once again review it and generate a recommendation against it. And I can put the exemption description that this storage account contains public safety manuals, which is primarily for end customers. That's it. And you will say waiver risk accepted. You're accepting the risk, you're putting the exemption description, and you will hit create. So what will happen? Azure will now stop auditing for this configuration, and Azure will give you score for it. So let's say this, I'm saying this recommendation has 1% of score, has an impact of 1%, then you will get that score, and Azure will not give you this recommendation till 31st of August. Sorry, 31st of December this year. On January 1st, once again, it will show you that recommendation. So this is how you basically audit your environment, by looking at recommendation. I'm saying you're not auditing the environment. Auditing is being done by Microsoft Defender for Cloud. As part of that auditing, it is putting together the recommendations. As an administrator, your job is to look into these recommendations, all recommendations one by one, and take appropriate action. Either follow the instructions in the recommendations and align with the best practice, or create an exemption in the recommendation by putting the justification. By the end, when you are done with this entire list, as and when you create an exemption or follow the recommendation, that recommendation will disappear from here. And slowly and gradually, with each with each recommendation disappearing, it will increase your security score. So by the end of this exercise, you would have improved your security score from existing 35% to 90% and above. That is what a security admin is responsible for. When Defender for Cloud service was not available, at that point in time, we used to have this service. As I said, there used to be a service with the name Azure Security Center. This used to be the service. This service would provide similar security recommendations. There is another service in Azure with the name Azure Advisor. Now, this service provides recommendations based on 5 pillars. So let's see advisor recommendations also. So we can type advisor. This is advisor. Now here you can see recommendations. Recommendations are being provided on 5 pillars. They are cost, security, reliability, cost, security, reliability, and operational excellence and performance. So these are the 5 pillars on which the recommendations are being based on. Now, the security recommendations in Azure Advisor is powered by Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So when we look at security recommendation, you will notice that they are the same recommendation which I was getting in Defender for Cloud. Only the view is different. See, it is the same recommendation. Microsoft Defender for Server should be enabled. All network ports should be restricted. So same recommendations I'm getting. So what I need to do, either I can fix these recommendations here, or I can fix these recommendations in Defender for Cloud solution. It's one and the same thing. Now, other than this, I'm also getting recommendation on cost, which basically means if I follow this recommendation, this will help me to lower the cost, monthly cost of my services. So let's see what are my cost recommendations. Now, since this is a lab environment, you will really not find much insights because A, we are not working with services. B, we have very limited services configured in this environment. So you can see in cost, it says score is 100%. I'm following all recommendations. The challenge is I only have one virtual machine, so there is no recommendation for it. Azure Advisor will take a minimum of 14 days to generate a recommendation after that service has been into existence. That's the reason it says 100%. For security, it is 29% because I'm directly violating some security best practices. However, for reliability, is it 100%? For operational excellence, there is one impacted resource and one recommendation. Let's see what that resource is. So it says that you have not enabled trusted launch virtual machine. That's one recommendation because it directly has impact on your operational excellence. I'm saying if you're using standard virtual machines and not use a trusted launch virtual machines, then there is a high probability that your virtual machines may get a malware which may affect the boot sector that will affect your system and application. So one recommendation is coming. Now this recommendation directly relates to cost. I follow this recommendation, my virtual machine cost will become higher, my monthly billing will be higher. So in these scenarios, you will need to, you will need to consult or you will need to decide yourself that whether you want to follow these recommendations or not. Because some recommendations are directly related to increase in cost. However, cost, security, and cost, it's a trade-off. You need to decide. See, security comes at a price. If you don't want to pay, you can't get security. So you need to look at your budget, whether it allows or not. Similarly, you see performance recommendations also. If there is any impacted resource, there is nothing because we hardly have any data in Azure. So these are my recommendations that I get or audit which Azure is doing. Now, prior to 2016, when these services were not available, you would do audit yourself as an expert of Microsoft Azure based on your skills and experience that you have acquired over the last couple of years working with Azure. You would have listed down your own checklist, audit checklist, which has best practices mentioned. And then based on that checklist, you will assess the configuration of an environment and either say it is aligned or say that it is in violation and accordingly provide remedial action. Starting from 2016, when these services were introduced, then the job of an Azure administrator was easy. Now, an Azure administrator only needs to follow recommendation. The hub part, the audit part is done by Azure service. You just need to follow the recommendation. That's how the audit part works. So we have Defender for Cloud, we have Azure Advisor. Then comes the third service that is very useful. Give me a minute. The third and last service in audit that we basically talk about is Azure Policy. So Azure Policy is another service that helps you to uh, audit your environment, look for service configurations, and decide whether those configurations aligns with your security best practices or not. So Azure Policy is a service that helps you uh, create. So this helps you create organization standards and enforce compliance at scale. This is what this service does, Azure Policy. Now let's think of a standard that you want to enforce in Azure. Any standard that comes to your mind, any best practice that comes to your mind. For example, let's say I don't want virtual machines with public IP to be created. So I don't, let's say there's one standard that we can think of, which is virtual machine must not be configured with public IP. That's one standard that comes to your mind. Second standard is that higher cost VMs must not be provisioned. So who is creating these standards? The security team. They are coming up with security policies and standards. So they are saying that okay, now that we have started using Azure, let's follow some ground rules. Let's create some ground rules and we will make sure that nobody has an exception. Nobody is an exception. So the ground rules are that I don't want virtual machines with public IP. I don't want higher cost virtual machines to be provisioned. I don't want this behavior, right? So you will think of those standards in mind. And then Azure Policy is the service that will help you implement that standard. It will help you enforce. And it will also look at existing resources and see whether existing resources are complying to that standard or not, right? So for example, I have a standard. Let me give you a demo of this since we also need to close the session. So for example, I don't want virtual machines to be configured with public IP because configuring virtual machines with public IP is a security risk. When I say it's a security risk, it basically means that with public IP configured on virtual machines may be, may be exposed to internet and they may get corrupted. So I don't want this. So let's see a demo of Azure Policy. How will I configure this and how will I enforce it in my environment? So I go to Azure Policy. This is the policy service. This is where you create a policy. Right now, you can see that your overall resource compliance is 50%. So there are some default policies that Microsoft has created, and your resources are not complying to those policies. If you want to see non-compliant policies, you can see here. And over here, you can see Azure security defaults. So some default configurations are not aligned. And here's the recommendation. You can see enable threat detection capabilities not compliant. So these are some best practices which are there, which are not compliant here. But I can create my own best practices. So for example, I want to create a policy so that nobody should be able to provision a virtual machine with public IP. Okay, so let's see how do we create it. So I will click on definitions. Here I will see all the policy templates. Azure has provided more than 200 policy templates that you can pick and choose. So I want to look for, this is the policy template for restricting configuration of virtual machines with public IP. Over here you can see network interface should not have public IP. So I will select this policy. This is the policy, and I will assign this policy. Now, when I assign this policy, I can select a scope of this policy. Let's say there is a department which needs to be exempted from this policy because they actually need virtual machines with public IP. It is a legitimate requirement from them. And you understand the risk, and you have also kind of made a note of it. You have got the approval from management. It has been documented into the risk register also. So in that case, you will probably exclude that department. So scope is Azure sponsorship, my subscription, and I can create an exemption also. Exemption for that scope. So I can select, okay, let's say this SC300 TCS batch 2 resource group belongs to that department. I can create an exception here also. So this resource group will be exempted from the policy that I'm creating. And other than this resource group, all of them will be enforced on by this policy. That's it. Then all I need is, just go, just fill in the information. It's already there. Network interface should not have public IP. You want to put some description, describe it. Policy enforcement. You can create a policy today, but do not enforce it. Just keep it there and maybe enforce it later on. So you can disable it, but I want to enforce it right now. Next, next, nothing you need to fill here. Non-compliance message you can put. So this is the message that user will see. You are not authorized to provision a virtual machine with public IP address. For more information, kindly contact system admin or global security team. So you can put the message also. Hit review plus create, and then create this policy. When you create a policy, there is no exception from identity perspective. Even the account admin, for example, you know that I'm the account admin of this subscription. Right now, I'm logged in with account admin credentials. Even I cannot bypass this policy. It is for everyone. Nobody can bypass the policy. Okay. So now that the policy is created, I can go to policies and see whether this policy is shown under assignments or not. Okay, the policy is created. It is shown under assignments. Network interface should not have public IP. This policy is created. Now let's go ahead and see whether this is getting enforced. So as I told you that Azure Policy Service, this service helps you create organization standard. So we have just created a standard that nobody will be able to provision a public IP with an exception to a department. And now let's see how it enforces compliance to this policy. So now let's say myself or somebody else tries to provision a virtual machine. So we are trying to create a virtual machine here. I'm taking Windows 2019, standard B2MS. This size is not available. Whatever is available, I'll just go with. So I will need to change the region. That's okay. I'll go to Canada Central. I know their sizes are available. The size is available here. I'll put username, password. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. All right. So I'm putting the password. I'm just going with the default options. On the disk, I'll just go with the default options. On the networking, I'll go with the default options. Now, one thing to note here is what I'm doing here. I am creating a new public IP for this VM, and that's where my policy is applicable. So look carefully. I'll just fill in all the information and just go to the next step. And now I will hit review plus create. This is where policy will come into the picture. As soon as I will hit review plus create, the policy will block execution of this request. So I hit review plus create and it will not review. It will give me an error. So you can see the error has come. It says validation failed. Click to view details. So when I click on view details, it clearly says error details. It says this provisioning was disallowed by policy. And the policy is network interface should not have public IP. And I'm also getting the message which I configured as an admin, which is you're not authorized to provision a virtual machine with public IP address. For more information, do this. So which means nobody from this moment onward will be able to provision a virtual machine with public IP, except that resource group that belongs to the department for which we created an exception. So this is another service, which is a security service that helps you audit the environment. Now, where is the auditing part? It, we have not talked about the auditing part. This is more of an enforcement, like Zscaler. What Zscaler is doing? Zscaler is not allowing you to uh, log into Azure portal using personal email domain. That's the more of a security configuration. Enforcement. Auditing means, do I have logs that will tell me that who all tried to violate this policy? Or do I have existing resources in the environment who are already in the violation of this policy? So for that, we will navigate to the policy service and you will see a resource that is currently in violation to this policy. Because we have a virtual machine in Azure, if you remember, there is one virtual machine that I have, and this virtual machine is configured with public IP. And you see the public IP here. So this machine is in clear violation of the policy which has been configured by admin. So when you navigate to the policy blade, you will see the violation also. So you can see that there are 6 non-compliant resources. When I click on that non-compliant resource, I will see that resource also. So I will need to click on compliance tab, and then I can see the non-compliant resources also. So for this policy, network interface should not have public IP. It is non-compliant. Who is non-compliant? It says 0 out of 1. It says non-compliant resource is 1. So I can click on this policy and it shows me the non-compliant resource also. And there we go. See, this is coming as non-compliant because this VM has a public IP. So I can click on it and I can verify that it's a non-compliant resource because this resource has a public IP on it. So this is how policy is helping me to audit the environment based on the configurations. Now, with the exception of, with the inclusion of Microsoft Defender for Cloud, with the inclusion of various Microsoft Cloud security benchmarks, administrators, uh, this is like AI taking human jobs. This is how it is happening. The security admins have left with very little or nothing to do now because most of the work that security admins would do is now taken care by these services. These services can take care of, I'm saying in the past, as an admin, you would manually look for each resource configuration and identify misconfigurations or any non-compliance. But now services are doing it, applications are doing it. So your job is more towards managing that service. That's it. You're not using your own brain now. You're not thinking creatively that what should I do? Now you are being told what needs to be done. So you have just created a policy. The policy service quickly discovers scans the entire subscription, identify if there is any non-compliant item, and it presents it to you. So it saves a lot of time of your life. You don't need to manually look for all these services and see which service has public IP. This is what it is doing. All you need to do, you can remediate it now. So for some of the items, you will find auto remediation option available, or so you can see create remediation task. For this one, it is not there, but you can create an exception. If you feel that this is done by purpose and this is needed, then you can create an exception, or you can go ahead and go navigate to this resource, remove the public IP, and probably wait for uh, okay. So policy refreshes time frame should be given. Okay. Okay, if it has not given the time frame, typically a policy refreshes every 4 hours. So 4 hours from now, it will once again run the scan and it will find that okay, the resource that was non-compliant is compliant, and it will remove this non-compliant message from here. So that's how policy service works in Azure. So when it comes to security, there is more in Microsoft Azure. Uh, Microsoft Defender for XDR is a suite of security solutions which is there in Azure. Microsoft Sentinel is another great solution which is there in Azure. If you have interest in those solutions, you already have recorded sessions. In fact, the XDR is for TCS itself. It is there, it is there on my channel. Go ahead and watch it and see for yourself that how Microsoft puts forward comprehensive security solutions to basically provide you comprehensive security coverage from all security threats. And in fact, in Defender XDR, there is a product with a Defender for Identity. So Defender for Identity actually provides a lot of security configurations or security best practices and enforcement for Microsoft Entra ID also. So Microsoft Entra, we will be configuring the entire duration of the training, remaining duration of the training. Now there could be a probability that you end up doing some misconfiguration in Entra. How will you know that there is a misconfiguration? Either you will manually look for all the configuration, or you have a solution in the name Defender for Identity. You can configure that solution, and within minutes, it will scan your entire Entra configuration, all the components, and it will populate that what is not configured right, what exactly you can fix it, where exactly the misconfiguration lies, and it will also give you an option to automatically remediate it, manually remediate it, or create an exemption for that configuration if that was done intentionally. So that's where Defender XDR comes into the picture. Now, XDR or Defender for Identity is outside of the scope of this training. But if you have interest, you can learn it from there. And if you come across any questions, doubts, or clarifications that you need, you can discuss it offline with me, either before the training session or after the training session. I give you that liberty. However, focus of this training is going to be on Entra. So, agenda for next week. First of all, assignment for the remaining part of this weekend. So the assignment for the remainder of the weekend is practice, review and practice all these services, topics covered in the session. Perform hands-on lab wherever needed. That's the assignment for the remainder of the week. And agenda for next week is start with Microsoft Entra ID. Now, I also have uh, one important assignment for you, and this is for those participants. I'm repeating once again, for those participants who are quite new to Entra ID. I still remember when I took your information on day one, some participants said that they have been to Entra ID space for the last 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. In corporate, you do mundane task, repetitive task. You do the same thing almost every day. So you don't have learning curve, great learning curve in a operations or corporate environment, which means you have gone through very limited exposure of Entra in those 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, right? Which means you lack a lot of fundamentals and basics of Entra or Active Directory in general, right? Which is basically needed to be able to understand SC300 part or the topics that we are going to do next week. So for those participants and for everyone who also have basic knowledge of Entra, and if you feel that you may have gaps in your knowledge, which is for sure, everyone has a gap, nobody is perfect. So for those people, please make sure that you go through my recorded session on Entra, which is on my channel. There are 4 videos on Entra. The video starts with the very basics of Azure Active Directory. I would not say Entra there because that was recorded last year. While Entra did not exist, Active Directory exists. So that would have the very base. It would start with the very basics of Entra, wherein it would talk about what Microsoft Entra is, overview of the service, and then how Entra integrates with on-premises. It would also have hands-on lab, wherein you are building on-premises directory infrastructure. Then you are synchronizing those directories with Entra. Then you're looking at configurations like password write back, password and hash synchronization, password, uh, you know, uh, and other capabilities. And you will also have some integration options like guest account and others. So there are 4 videos. If you really get time, even if you don't want to do the entire you don't want to go through the entire video, but at least go through the overview of it, because that will help you really next week to keep pace with what will be covered. Because the moment I get into the Entra space, I will not focus on the fundamentals I have already done. So these are the 3 videos only: Microsoft Entra part 1, part 2, and part 3. And if you look collectively, the duration is 2 hours or 2.5 hours, I would say. So if you can spend 2.5 hours, give yourself 2.5 hours today, tomorrow, before Monday morning. This will really help you with the hands-on lab. Make sure that you take some time out, go through these videos, get a basic understanding of Active Directory services and basic, basic components basic things about Active Directory. For example, what is an Active Directory? What is a domain? What is a forest? What is sites? How do we? What is federation? What is certificate? What is SSL? The basic components or basic building blocks of a directory infrastructure. Very important. That will help you next week. Otherwise, you will find scratching your head. You will find struggling to understand what I will be covering, as well as struggling to complete the hands-on lab. So I don't want you to be in that situation. That is where please make sure that you go through the basics of Active Directory, Entra, either via Azure documentation, either via third-party documentation, or via the recorded sessions which you already have there. Since it is Entra throughout the training, it cannot happen that I'll say some participant probably could not do virtual network, which did not impact storage service topic. Some participants were kind of not available during storage service, but they were able to cover up on the virtual machines. That is not the case with Entra. If you lose first day, you will struggle second day, and you will probably struggle more on the third day and the subsequent week, because all topics are interrelated. It's all Entra configuration that we will start from Monday next week till the time we are done with the last configuration of Entra. And all configurations are interrelated, dependent on the previous configuration. So it is highly recommended that you leave all your office work behind, put an out of office in your mail that you are in a training session and you're not available from 9 a.m. till 1 p.m. unless there is a medical emergency. That's it. All things can wait. That's the with that, with that intention and interest level, you should join the session from next week. So I wish you all the best.